'Tis the season of gifting and halls to deck, and the who's in Who Newville were in love with new tech. Where can we find Sonos and Samsung and Nintendo, they shouted. Would they find it in one place? This they questioned and doubted. When suddenly a who yelled, Walmart's the place to start! And each who added headphones, TVs, and games to their carts. With Walmart, their shopping was done in a flurry. They cried out, who knew? And ordered their gifts in a hurry. Shop the latest tech gifts in the Walmart app.
Come to DSW for the shoes, stay for the fun. Because let's be honest, if shoe shopping isn't fun, are you even doing it right? So go ahead, try something new. Try something different. Good different. Try something that feels like you. You know, the real you. And then definitely brag about it later. Because at DSW, you've got unlimited freedom to play. With sneakers, boots, and everything in between for every style, mood, and occasion, you'll definitely find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. DSW. Let us surprise you.
A warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSIN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be chatting in segment number 2 with one of our good friends here at the network, Ben Stevens. He does a tremendous job with our weekend programming with Live Bet Saturday. I know that he's been doing some great work on the college basketball front as well as the college football front. We're going to be chatting with him about what we've all seen here in the first 2 weeks of the season. He, much like myself, has an affinity for the Big Ten, so we're going to be chatting about what we've all seen in the Big Ten thus far this season. We'll take a look at those big games happening in the Champions Classic over at MSG and so much more. And then in the final segment, going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Tuesday as we hit some bank shots. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, large ZM, naming does not matter, size per usual. Please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Do not get in any Twitter/X questions today, but everything is powered by Better. That is BETR. They're making it easier to get into the game with daily fantasy than ever before, as all you need to do is go to BETR.app, put in that promo code of VSINPOD, VSINPOD. That gets you $10 free. All you do is have that $10, you take a look at the board, you take a look at your favorite player. If you think that they're going to go over and under a stat, and boom, you're all good for tip-off. And let's tip things off by taking a look at everything that we saw in college basketball Monday, try to find some trends, and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
Not a lot of ranked teams in action on Monday, and the few ranked teams that we did see in action, they had a little bit of a tough time covering large numbers. As for Wisconsin, they do get the job done and they look very solid on offense, but they only win by kind of 94-69. That was a spread that at one point got to like 25.5. It all depended upon your closing number. There were some places that closed at 24.5. There were some places that closed 25.5. So that came down to the number with regards to this one, but still, you had Nick Boyd be able to supply for Wisconsin 25 points in this one. Wisconsin 15 of 39 from 3. SIU Huddersville was coming in playing in some really good defense, by the way, and whole was greater than some of its parts for SIU Huddersville to cover most numbers as they went 7 of 18 from 3-point range. For Rice, they were able to get the cover against Tennessee. Tennessee saw a nice convincing win, 91-66. Offense looked relatively rock solid there, but that was a line more around about 26.5. So not as if these ranked teams had like a bad go of it or anything like that. And for Tennessee, they were able to get a nice performance out of Felix Opara, 20 points, 8 rebounds, and Nate Ament, the star freshman, 19 points, 10 rebounds of his own, but for Tennessee, still a little bit concerning with regards to some of the perimeter play. Only went 6 of 19 from 3-point range. No concerns for Gonzaga, though. 122-50. They completely dump truck Southern Utah. This Gonzaga defense is great, by the way. I mean, for Southern Utah, they shoot 30% from the floor. They go 4 of 25 from 3. They had 23 turnovers and 18 made field goals. And Braden Huff, 11 of 13 from the floor for 22 points. Graham Ike, 13 points, 5 rebounds. They only needed him for 21 minutes. They went to their bench. They had 6 different players off the bench play a double-figure amount of minutes, and Davis Fogel was able to put in there 19 points. So nice, solid domination there. NC State, they do get the win over VCU, but this was a nip-and-tuck game, 85-79. The final is for NC State, 8 of 21 from 3, but VCU, they held in there thanks to going 13 out of 42 from the outside. They won the turnover battle as well. VCU won that battle 17-12, as the man that bailed out NC State was Darion Williams. He supplies the team with 28 points, 7 rebounds, and then Trey Allman stepped up in a big way, 25 points, and his most significant contribution, 10 of 10 at the free throw line, as Jadian Tracy, he was able to supply this VCU team with 16 points for them to be able to remain lively in that one. And then you also had, in terms of a ranked team, Iowa State absolutely take it to Sonell, 96-57, as you had Joshua Jefferson do a tremendous job in this one. He was able to give you 23 points. He supplied 9 rebounds, and for Sonell, they actually go 10 of 27 from 3, but the problem was they had 20 turnovers in this game. You did have Iowa State have only 7 in this game, so that led to the big, giant, lopsided win for Iowa State as they were able to cover all numbers on that one. You did see a few moneyline underdogs be able to get to the window. One that I was going for, the Colgate Raiders, a minty fresh win over Siena. I have no idea why they were like a 6-point underdog, 72-69. The final in this one for Colgate, just 3 of 11 from 3, but they shoot 54% from the floor, and the Colgate Roar is back. Jalen Cox, he's become the Mr. Do-It-All for this team. 22 points, 4 steals. As for Colgate, they did a solid job in terms of taking care of the ball with only 10 turnovers. And for Siena, you had Gavin Doty be able to put in their 14 points, but it was Francis Forlock who gave you 16 points off the bench and tried to be able to keep them lively, and they win the rebound battle. Siena does by a count of 33-27, but Siena finds a way to be able to pull this one out, get the job done, so you do like to be able to see that. Oregon was able to restore a little bit of order against Oregon State. This was not like a money line underdog or anything like that, but Oregon 87-75. This was a closing line, more around about 12.5, 13, depending upon where you got it. So Oregon State was able to get the cover, but Oregon had really been struggling on offense. 10-24 from 3. Jackson Shellstead was able to supply 22 points. Nate Biddle throws in there 24, and Oregon State gets a cover thanks to their bench. Yak, great name. 10 points. Isaiah C., he comes out off the bench. He supplies the team with 14 points. And for Oregon, they were able to do a nice job in terms of taking care of the turnover woes that have been ailing them. They had just 10 turnovers in this game. And then you did see out west as well a very intriguing game between Portland State and CS Bakersfield. Meet for the Roadrunners, who did not get it done, 93-80. As Portland State, Jalen Henderson had 20 points for them in a win. North Alabama got down very early to Clemson, down 45-22 at the half. They clawed a nice quality cover by a count of 81-61. Looks like Clemson is back in full force with regards to their defense. And for Arizona State, they were down at the half against Georgia State. The defense really took hold. They were able to outscore Georgia State in the second half, 41-23, keeps the total under. And Arizona State, they do get the 75-62 win, but they're unable to cover that large double-figure spread for Georgia State. They do go 9 of 25 from three-point range. And for Arizona State, Mo Odom, who came on over from the WCC, looked very solid in this game. 24 points, 9 assists, only 2 turnovers. As way that Arizona State got the job done, they won the turnover battle by a count of 19-10. West Virginia is just continuing to pound teams into oblivion. You finally got it over in a West Virginia game, 81-59 being the final in this one. And for Lafayette, they were catching a big number here. They were right around about 23.5 point dogs, so they were able to cover that one. But still, West Virginia looking very rock solid. And then the other team in that backyard brawl, well, they had a very nice bounce back against Bucknell. How about 84-50? They were able to house the bracket busting Bison. They might not be busting any brackets this season, as a great showing for Pittsburgh in this one with 23 big points out of Barry Dunning off the bench. He was able to go 7 of 11 from 3, and for Pittsburgh, 13 out of 25 from the outside. They win the rebound battle 42-29, as you had Papa Amadou Kante come off the bench. He was able to supply that team with 11 rebounds, so they did a rock solid job. And for Georgia, they've been absolutely dismantling teams. This was not a close game, but hey, if you took the 38 plus with Florida A&M, you got there. 87-57 final. Florida A&M, by the way, was your best against the spread team in all of college basketball last season, but still, once again, a nice performance for Georgia, who wins this game by 30 points despite going 2 of 26 from 3-point range, as they were able to do a rock solid job winning the turnover battle 25-13. That's a big reason why you were able to get an under in this game, as well as Georgia has been one of your better offensive teams in all of college basketball. And home underdog cash this year, North Dakota State over Southern Illinois, 92-85. North Dakota State was one of your best 3-point shooting teams in all of college basketball last season. Rough start to the season, but they go 16 out of 35 in this one with Tate Smith off the bench, going 5 of 10 from 3-point range. So he did a nice job in terms of being able to restore a little bit of roar and order there. And Oakland is looking pesky. They're just 1-4 straight up, but they go on the road against another power conference team. They gave Purdue a good fight, and they gave Central Florida a great fight. 87-83. Central Florida barely claws this one out as Isaac Garrett for Oakland. He was able to put in there 23 points. Oakland spent a little bit hit or miss with their three-point shooting this year, but they go 9-23 here as Brett White, the second off the bench, 6 of 11 from three-point range. And for Central Florida, the Milwaukee transfer and Jermichael Stillwell, 20 points, 14 rebounds. That was a big reason why they were able to stave off the upset, and they did find a way to be able to persevere and get the job done there. And then one other game of intrigue to really look at is the fact that you got High Point just looking really good right now, 93-50. I recognize the Canisius was rough last season, but Rob Martin, 17 points, 8 assists, 5 steals. That was rock solid for them. And we do have Philly 5 action going on as well. The Penn Quakers, they were able to get the job done against St. Joe's as an underdog, 83-74. The Steve Donahue revenge game, and Steve Donahue was not able to get revenge on Penn. And for Penn, Ethan Roberts, 8 of 15 from the floor, 3 of 5 from 3, and for Penn, under Fran McCaffrey, that offense is humming. They actually played a little bit of defense in the second half. St. Joe's only scored 33 points in the second half of that game, so a big giant yay verily there, and yay verily to the fact that Prairie View got a cover against Missouri. 91-73 was the final on that one. Jacob Cruz was able to give you 20 points, but the SWAC attack has been in full force, and the Tulsa Golden Hurricane attack has been in full force as well. They've been able to cover some numbers. Kansas State just barely claws this one out, 84-83. It looked like they were actually going to lose this game as Tulsa was up by 3 points with about, I would say, 30 seconds or so remaining. Kansas State, they find a way to be able to just do a great job in the final minute, generating a turnover or two as the Kansas State Wildcats only go 5 of 24 from three-point range, but PJ Haggerty still finds a way to be able to give the team 31 points, 10 rebounds. He was the best player out there on the floor, but for Tulsa, they do a nice job holding tough in this one, and Tulsa, they do lose the rebound battle 40-38, but they did a nice job going 21 of 29 at the free throw line, and when the Kansas State won this game, they go 19 of 21 at the charity stripe. And if you're looking trend-wise at what we're getting in college basketball right now, it has all of a sudden become a little bit more of an underwhelming season. The under is hitting at 50.6%, 318 unders at 311 overs. Favorites are now hitting at 49.8% against the spread. So if you're wondering if the bookmakers were going to make adjustments, they did. 313, 315, and 7 against the spread for these favorites. So that's been very much of intrigue, with road favorites actually doing a solid job. Road favorites have been 42, 36, and 3 against the spread. So the home underdogs have had a little bit of a tough time, but you're starting to see those adjustments, and I, for one, have been very happy about it. So that's what we're seeing in college basketball right now, and that's where we're all getting trend-wise. Coming next, how about if we do take a look at the Big Ten, we take a look at what we're going to get in the Champions Classic, the start of the season, and so much more with Ben Stevens right here on Kuskovic with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSIN Family Podcast.
'Tis the season of gifting and halls to deck, and the who's and who Newville were in love with new tech. Where can we find Sonos and Samsung and Nintendo, they shouted. Would they find it in one place? This they questioned and doubted. When suddenly a who yelled, Walmart's the place to start! And each who added headphones, TVs, and games to their carts. With Walmart, their shopping was done in a flurry. They cried out, who knew? And ordered their gifts in a hurry. Shop the latest tech gifts in the Walmart app.
Are you looking to get an inside edge this college basketball season? Well, VSIN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSIN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word, .com. For anyone that is new to VSIN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSIN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSIN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSIN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSIN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSIN Family Podcast. Great to have this man aboard, as it's always nice to get a man that has affinity for the Big Ten, much like myself, and we've got that with Ben Stevens. He does such an amazing job here at VSIN. You're able to catch him on the weekend with a lot of our live betting shows. I know he's been doing a little bit of film work over on the Prop Points show as well. Does an amazing job on the football front, does a great job on the basketball front. You've seen him all over the place. You know that he is rock solid, and you're able to catch him on the old Twitter/X at Ben Scott Stevens all together. And Ben, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Greg, thanks for having me, man. Happy to have college basketball season now fully underway. Feast week, one of the great times of the year, especially in the early non-con portion of the schedule with the MTEs that we have. So very excited to be breaking down some college ball.
Absolutely. We're going to be getting those multi-team events going within the next few days. We've seen one or two small ones, but that said, it really gets started in full force within the next few days. And just how have you taken a look at the first 2 weeks of the season? Because this is something I've talked about quite a bit on this podcast, and I want to get your thoughts on just the fact that it feels like we've seen less defense than ever before, and we're really seeing a lot of new coaches coming up to the D1 ranks and deciding that they're going to be really looking to make their sort of like imprint on college basketball and really push tempo.
Yeah, spread and space and pace, I think, is what we are seeing a lot of right now, Greg. And it's a really interesting point to even see in those top 25 and top 10 matchups that we have seen so far this year, Auburn and Houston, although as we saw at the end of the game, the Cougs defense, still a staple under Kelvin Sampson, can be stifling. But you take the Purdue and Alabama game, right, where we know what Nate Oates' system has been. Fire as many threes as possible, up tempo always, leading to a lot of points as well. But Purdue has the style to match, as do many teams now around the country. It is a little bit more offensive, just in the way that college basketball has transitioned, not to an NBA style by any means, but the idea of efficiency on the basketball court and calling for what the game is asking for, tempo and speed-wise, a lot more three-pointers. For instance, in the Big Ten Conference, we have seen Darren DeVries do things in Bloomington, Indiana from the three-point arc we have not seen in a very, very long time in the last decade, with the amount and the quality of three-point shots that Indiana is starting to take. So I think we're seeing that just become more of a flow of college basketball in the efficiency numbers and why you kind of construct your offensive pace as you do.
And I'm so glad that in passing that you mentioned the Big Ten as well, because I feel like they're the one conference that has really had the most change over the last few years as well, because we both remember the days of the Big Ten where it was every single game was pretty slow, pretty grimy. I still remember my senior year in high school, I believe. That was the old famous 37-33 game between Wisconsin and Penn State. I don't think I will ever erase that memory from my mind. And it does feel like, with regards to the Big Ten, for lack of a better term, they've gotten with the times. And I think that these coaching changes that have been made over the last few seasons have been very good for the conference.
Yeah, when you look at it right now, Greg, in terms of some of those offensive efficiency numbers on KenPom early in the season, you're seeing some of the most efficient offenses in the sport. Purdue is the most efficient offense at the moment as we enter here this third week of the season. Illinois is a top 3 offense. Like we mentioned, for teams like Indiana, the improvement already there in terms of the efficiency numbers. I love what Eric Musselman has done at USC, and even a place like Wisconsin that necessarily has been a little bit slower paced, at least at times, based on how their offensive scheme has evolved the last couple of years under Greg Gard. Based on his coaching staff, we have seen that offense on the uptick. Wisconsin setting records last year in terms of points scored in the output, and with so much of that returning talent there still in Madison this season, with guys like John Blackwell and Nolan Winter back, you're going to see those offensive numbers continue to be pushed on the forefront. So even in a league like the Big Ten, it's not necessarily the Big Ten West in football of how we think of it, or even Big Ten basketball about 10, 15 years ago. It is certainly about efficiency really at every level.
Yep, when Indiana was able to put up 100 on Marquette a week or two ago, that was really a nice sign as well. As joining me on the show, we do have Ben Stevens. He does a tremendous job over here at VSIN. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And with that, I think that it's very interesting what we're going to be getting in action on Tuesday, because one of the big games is going to be a Michigan State team that, as a lot of teams have been speeding themselves up, as we've seen a lot of change, they have been sticking with their style. They're still a defense-oriented team that I think we could expect a little bit of of a rise with their 22% three-point shooting. They take on Kentucky right now as about a 5.5 point underdog. How do you take a look at this game? Because I think that's really interesting that Michigan State has gotten the job done in all their games, including one against Arkansas, despite the fact that they can't hit water if they foul a boat from three.
Yeah, and we saw that improve last year in East Lansing for Michigan State, but some of those same issues starting to creep up at least this year for Tom Izzo and company. I think we will see the continued offensive development of the veteran guys that they have. Of course, that will be a key for Jeremy Fears Jr. Shooting the ball from range, he seemed uncomfortable to even hoist shots from anywhere beyond the free throw line extended a season ago. You are starting to see some of that comfortability start to pay off, and although the athleticism is sky high for Cohen Carr, he has certainly worked on his outside shooting and perimeter shooting as well. It really, though, is, Greg, like you mentioned, a Tom Izzo basketball team. Gritty up front. They have the veteran leadership along the entirety of their team, but certainly in the backcourt with Jeremy Fears Jr., where Tom Izzo teams, the staple of it is rebound better than anybody, attack the glass with ferocity, and then get out in transition as quickly as you can to not have to settle deep into the shot clock for maybe some of those perimeter shots. And when you have a point guard with the expertise that Jeremy Fears Jr. has, that's always going to be a recipe, certainly later into the year, February, and of course March, for this Michigan State team to shine. And when you have the two big men down low in Carson Cooper and Jackson Kohler, whose offensive game continues to develop as well, I think there's a lot to like about Michigan State. I know Mark Pope has been a little bit less than pleased with how Kentucky has started this year in terms of some of their maturity and the leadership needed. Very different story for MSU. Although Tom Izzo has been a little bit critical of his team shooting, even more so from the three-point range at the free throw line, I really like what I've seen out of Michigan State so far this season. It's going to be a great battle inside Madison Square Garden. There's no doubt about it. A really good Kentucky team that has a lot of length, has a lot of athleticism. We'll see if Michigan State and some of that defensive intensity in the early season test is up for the effort.
Yep, this is going to be one of the more fun games that we're going to get. I mean, forget about on Tuesday, but the entirety of non-conference play, I'm very curious to see what is going to be happening with that one. And how about you take a look at some of these games like we are going to be getting on Tuesday as just a sort of a litmus test for some of these conferences, because I do think that it is a big deal when you do see these sorts of matchups, because we remember the SEC and getting all of those teams in the NCAA tournament. Much of it was because they avoided all sorts of bad losses. They got the job done in non-conference play, and while this is going to be big for the resume of Michigan State, I also think that it's big for the Big Ten in general as well.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Greg. I think it's a really great point. It's one of my favorite things about the early portion of non-conference play in college basketball is maybe compared to college football, right? Just because of the overall volume of games that you play in hoops as compared to football. I would love to see some more of those marquee matchups early in the season based on non-conference scheduling. But of course, that has been a hot button topic in college football. In college basketball, though, you get these litmus tests not only for your own program, where you need to grow throughout the entirety of the college basketball season. If you win the game, it's fantastic. It is a resume booster and a resume staple that will stay with you from now here in the middle of November through the middle of March when your resume is compared and that team sheet is shown among others trying to get into the NCAA tournament if you were a bubble team, or maybe even depending on what your seed line ends up being. It is something you can build the entirety of your season on in one game that early of the year. It is never going to harm you. And that's why I really like it, even from the defeat perspective. If you lose this game on Tuesday in Madison Square Garden for Michigan State and or Kentucky, or the other one between Duke and Kansas, not only are you learning from it and have that growth experience, it's not necessarily something that's going to be seen as a hindrance. It's not going to be a quad 3 or quad 4 loss that can be a damning nail in the coffin. It's what I love about college basketball early in the season. Not only do we as the fan, as the bettor, get to learn so much, those in the program get to do the same, and there is really the risk-reward scenario is not so much risk, it's a lot of reward, and then you get to learn from it as well.
Absolutely. I think that that's one of the big advantages of college basketball rather than college football. And college football, just so many limited opportunities. I know that with the expanded playoff, one loss isn't going to be quite the end-all, be-all, but you can't take too many losses in college football. Meanwhile, in college basketball, we see teams with 13 to 14 losses make it all the time into the NCAA tournament. So I do think that that's a big factor in this as well. And then you in passing did mention that big Duke versus Kansas game, and do want to get your thoughts here, because with regards to Kansas, it sounds like Darren Peterson, if he does play in this game, he's going to be very limited, so that's no doubt a big loss for them. But how do you take a look at this bunch? Because I think a lot of people always think that Duke is this high-octane, super-duper up-tempo team, but they're really not, and I think that comes down to just them being really efficient more than anything else.
Yeah, really efficient with the basketball. I think what we're seeing out of Cam Boozer right now, Greg, and the kind of lost opportunity in the Mecca to maybe have that battle for the first overall pick in the 2026 NBA draft between Cam Boozer and Darren Peterson. That sours the game because it's going to be awesome, and it's two of the premier programs in this sport, but you do lose a little bit of that. I think to your point about Duke's efficiency offensively, they're not exactly a team that plays with the fastest tempo. Early in the year, they have been up a little bit, but I think what they do defensively and what we have seen in the John Shire era there in Durham is really try to slow down the opponent's length on that side of the ball, because it confounds the effective shots that you are going to get off against this Blue Devils defense. And I think we have seen that early in the returns here for Duke. Still very early, but at least in the returns that we have seen for the Blue Devils. And that's where I think Kansas could struggle against this Duke team on a Tuesday night in MSG. That's where I really look at Duke being able to slow down the opponent possession and make difficult shots and make even some of those opportunities hard to come by. That's kind of been the brilliance of what Duke has done defensively, not just early here this year or even last year, of course, in the deep NCAA tournament run, but what John Shire's teams and what Duke basketball has done for the last few seasons.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that it's going to be really fun to be taking a look at this game, as we do have ourselves some really, really nice games to be able to start the season. As joining me on the show, we do have Ben Stevens. He does such great work over here at VSIN. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and certainly those are going to be the main attraction games, but we do have a few other games involving Big Ten teams, and it becomes a little bit hard to be able to bet this one with Iowa being about a 25-point favorite against Southeast Missouri State. But that's what have you made out of this Iowa team? Because it's just very, very unique what we have seen in terms of a guy in Ben McCollum have his team at the D2 ranks 2 years ago. Now he's coaching over at Iowa, and early returns, I recognize that they got a little bit of a test in the first half against Xavier, but so far, very, very good.
Very, very good. And I think if you're an Iowa Hawkeye fan, you have seen this Iowa team be so good offensively in a decade and a half under Fran McCaffrey, but what you have lost is some of that defensive intensity on that side. That's what Ben McCollum teams are always going to bring. They understand the 94 feet of a basketball floor and how crucial every single foot is on that hardwood. And we have seen that offensively. I think they have one of the best guards in the country in Bennett Sturtz, now running the show for the offensive scheme. They've got so much talent all around. Cam Manyow, who I think runs the paint better than most big men, especially for what he can do and what we have seen at Drake. You are going to see an Iowa team that does not play, although the tempo has been a little bit slow this year, but does not play with the same tempo that we saw in Ben McCollum's year with the Drake Bulldogs. They are going to pick it up a tad, but what they are so good at doing is kind of creating some chaos and confusion on the defensive side of the ball. I've been incredibly impressed by the immediate returns for the Iowa Hawkeyes now in the Ben McCollum era, but that's kind of what I expected. And if you saw what he did at Northwest Missouri State, once a Bearcat, always a Bearcat, and how he won at that level with such proficiency and such production, and you saw the immediate elevation at Drake, I don't think it's all that surprising then, Greg, to see the immediate elevation even at the high major level with the Iowa Hawkeyes. They are going to be a team that I expected when we saw the Big Ten preseason poll. They checked in around 9 or 8 or 9 or 10, I believe it was, to finish a little bit higher than what the preseason poll was expecting of the Hawks. I also thought Washington and year number 200 Danny Sprinkle would do much of the same. I think this is going to be a really, really good Iowa team that's around that 5, 6, 7 seed line come March, and they can play a style of basketball in those games to win when it matters most.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I'm really liking what I'm seeing out of this Iowa team right now. I think that they're going to continue to be able to get the job done. We're going to be very, very keen on what we're going to be seeing out of them moving forward, as I still think that's really good. And I want to get your thoughts on this as well, because speaking of Ben McCollum, him coming up from the D2 ranks, it does feel like these teams that have went the Division II route, like we've seen it over at Cal State Northridge over the last few years. Denver has been a nice surprise to begin the season. It just feels like time and time again when these schools, instead of going with a retread or some sort of an unknown assistant, they go down to the Division II ranks for a proven winner, that they just seem to get rewarded every single time, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really think, Greg, whether it's in college basketball, heck, I think you can make a similar argument in college football that winners win. and there is some sort of development process, especially collegiately, when you are molding 18, 19, and 20-year-olds to play in a certain style, to have a certain rhythm within your program, from a practice, from a preparation, from a film study perspective, where you kind of can control what that schedule and what that life looks like, that if you are a motivator, if you are a winner, people will buy into that sort of confidence more so than just pure athleticism or pure talent. Now, when you get to the higher levels of professional sport, those things start to elevate, right? And that's where you see those greater areas of distinction. Collegiately, if you can have a system that people buy into, and as a large group, you are all bought in, those kind of winning values carry over on impressionable young adults who are still playing these games despite the millions and millions of dollars that are now, of course, a part, at least in the forefront, of what we have all seen collegiately in athletics in that space in the last few years. There is something about winning and developing at this level. And if there has been a proven process that has worked, that I think does translate even to the higher levels as you kind of rise up the ranks.
Yep, totally agree with you. I love what I've been seeing out of Iowa this year and a lot of those guys that have come up from the D2 ranks. And with regards to just what we've seen here this season, has there been a team or two that has really impressed you, that they could be in action on Tuesday, they might not be in action on Tuesday, but just a team or two that is really catching your attention and maybe you're a little bit surprised by them to the positive?
I think there's a team in Illinois right now, Greg, that is really going to be a factor, not only in the Big Ten race this year, but of course nationally as well. And of course, when you start with this Illinois team, it's the Itches, of course, that Brad Underwood has recruited so well from the Balkan region. Of course, Tomislav has been there, but now his brother Zvonimir joins him as well. I thought the performance we saw out of David Mirkovic for Illinois in their recent win against Colgate, albeit against Colgate, but 27 points, 21 rebounds, what he does for this team has been sensational. They've got the early season win in Champaign inside the State Farm Center against Jacob Toppin and the Red Raiders. That is already the resume booster that you can hope it can be. And if they can go to Chicago on Wednesday night in what might be a neutral site, but of course many in the blue and orange of the Illini there inside the United Center against Alabama, and pick up another marquee victory here early in November in their non-conference slate, really, to me, there's nothing this Illinois team cannot do. We'll see how that defense continues to improve over this season, but the early returns have been great, especially with the length and the maturity on the defensive glass. I'm really impressed by what I have seen out of Illinois. And of course, the Eastern Europeans, the European wave into college basketball is going to get the headlines. It is going to be a talking point. It will be a narrative for this Illini team all year long. But the veteran leadership now of Kylan Boswell and how well he has performed early this season for Illinois cannot be discredited as well. He is now there in his second year. The Champaign kid, the Arizona transfer, is really, I think, the glue that makes everything go for this Illinois team. Despite all the talent around him, he remains supreme in my estimation. This is an Illinois team, Greg, that I really think is going to be top four in the Big Ten, earning a double bye into the conference tournament and able to make some noise once again in the month of March.
Absolutely. I always like to call them the international men of mystery on this podcast. Yeah. And man, they have been able to do a rock solid job there, just like you're doing a great job, Ben. I know that you're doing a lot of hosting here at VSIN. I know you're doing a lot in terms of college football, but you do a great job on the college basketball front. You do quite a bit in the NFL. You do a little bit of everything, and you do so also well. So love to give people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, here on VSiN each and every Saturday. It's Live Bet Saturday, noon to 3 p.m. Eastern time, alongside my man Dustin Sweetelson. Those live betting opportunities, reacting to everything that we are seeing in the early window of college football, and making appearances all around the VSiN network to hopefully highlight all the great things that we are seeing in college football and college basketball. If you give me a follow on Twitter, on X, however you determine, it is going to be called at Ben Scott Stevens. That's where most of my breakdowns, most of the information, most of the stats that I love to share out, that's kind of where everything is headquartered, Greg. So thanks again for having me on the show, man. It was a really great time.
Absolutely. I know that Ben is doing such a tremendous job taking a look at this great game of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Ben for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family podcast. Coming next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday as we hit some big shots.
'Tis the season of gifting and halls to deck, and the who's and who Newville were in love with new tech. Where can we find Sonos and Samsung and Nintendo, they shouted. Would they find it in one place? This they questioned and doubted. When suddenly a who yelled, Walmart's the place to start. And each who added headphones, TVs, and games to their carts. With Walmart, their shopping was done in a flurry. They cried out, who knew? And ordered their gifts in a hurry. Shop the latest tech gifts in the Walmart app.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSIN family podcast. Always great to be joined by Ben Stevens. He does great work here at the network, taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. Does a great job on the football front as well. Every single time he joins me, lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Ben for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at gunit_81. We're going to be going in Las Vegas rotation order. This is where we go with the games involving two big conference teams first, and then games involving teams from these conferences. That would be the Patriot League, the America East, the SWAC, the MEAC, the Big South, the Southland, the Northeast Conference. I believe I have hit them all. Those are going to be the games that are going to be listed at the bottom. So how about if we do get things started with 601, 602. Kentucky and Michigan State do battle from Madison Square Garden for the Champions Classic. Kentucky a 5 to 5.5 point favorite. Totals between 153.5 to a 154, and I'm going to take a shot here on Michigan State. I only set them as a 2.5 point underdog. With Michigan State, 3-point shooting has been grody. They are shooting less than 22% from 3-point range, and is this Michigan State team going to be good from 3? No. Are they better than shooting less than 22% from 3-point range? Yes. This is a team that's very much built down low. Jackson Kaler has been able to give the team 14 points, 13 rebounds per game. It's a Michigan State team that they do rank 4th in all of college basketball in terms of rebound percentage. Now, on the flip side, you've got a Kentucky team that, even with Jaden Quanten's currently out, they are number 5 in all of college basketball. You've had Michael Moreno come in. He's been able to do a good job in terms of being able to give this team some boards. You've had Mahmoud Bate be able to give you about 7 rebounds per game. I completely butchered that name, but you know what? Andrej Jelovic, who comes over from Croatia, he's been able to give this team a little bit of pop as well. It's a Kentucky team that had that cold 3-point shooting performance against Nichols to begin the season. Ever since then, they've been able to heat up in terms of their offense, but they're not really forcing the issue. They're only generating about 9.5 turnovers per game. They are well outside the top 320 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. That means good, clean offense to be had by Michigan State, and that should lead to them winning the turnover battle. As for Michigan State, they've been middle of the road in terms of being able to generate turnovers. I do think that they get going a little bit more from the outside. Trey Ford still shooting only about 21% from 3. It was a big pickup from Stanford, and you do get good, clean offense with Jeremy Fears, giving out over 9 assists per game. Not necessarily the world's greatest scorer, but is a guy that's doing a good job dishing it out with the likes of Colin Carr and company down low. I do think that Michigan State holds in there. I like what Ortega Owe and Denzel Aberdeen are doing in the backcourt for Kentucky, but I did set this line at a 2.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points with Michigan State. Kentucky, as per usual, looking to push a tempo under Mark Pope. They've been a top 50 team in terms of total possessions per game. I think he gets some late game fouling. Somebody told 154.5, so 154 less like the over to go with those points with Michigan State. 603, 604 on the card. Princeton is on the road against Iona. Iona is a 4 to 4.5 point favorite. Totals between a 152 to a 152.5, and set total of 154.5. I like the over. Princeton should see a little bit of positivity with their 3-point shooting, but this is still not the same Princeton team that we've seen in past years. Xavier Lee heading on over to Florida obviously has a lot to do with that, but they really lose each other top 3 scores from season ago. That's a big reason why I did set Iona here as an 8.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay that number. It's a lot of the ancillary pieces like CJ Happy, Jackson Hickey, Dalen Davis needing to step up. Davis last year gave the team about 8 points per contest, was mid 33-point shooter, and now he needs to be the main facilitator for an offensive Princeton that is currently outside the top 300 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They are outside the top 200 with regards to their 3-point shooting percentage. Again, I think that goes a little bit northward, but now they face off against an Iona team that they're allowing opponents to shoot less than 21% from 3-point range. Again, that's a small sample size. They're not going to allow opponents to shoot 21% from 3-point range all season long, but this is a team that clearly has some nice size around the perimeter. You bring in some like a Lamine Salbi, who began his career over at Incarnate Word. He was unable to get out there on the floor really there, or UTSA, but he's come in and he's been a really nice wing player for this team. You've had Toby Harris give this team 12 points per contest after he began his career at the non-D1 ranks, and it is an Iona team looking to push some tempo under Dan Garreau. He was a NBA assistant for the New Orleans Pelicans a season ago. Denver Anglin, he was a very nice high 33-point shooter shooter over at Rice. Go Owls last season. He's been able to give this team a little bit of something in the backcourt, but it's really been all about CJ Anthony, guy that began his career over at Cincinnati, just dealt with a lot of injuries, couldn't get out there on the floor, but he's done a great job running this offense. 6 assists, 17 points per contest, and they face a Princeton team that never really generates a lot of turnovers, so that should keep things clean for an Iona team that has been turning the ball over about 13 times per game. Iona currently shooting 42.5% from 3 and 63% at the free throw line. Free throw percentage should be going up. The 3-point shooting percentage should be going downward. That's what you get in a small sample size, but that said, with Princeton never being a team that really hits the glass very well, that's the main kryptonite of Iona. I do think that Iona finds a way to be able to get the job done here against a Princeton team that launches a lot of threes. Over 45% of their points come from made threes. That's certain in all of college basketball. With Iona guarding the arc, I like them. I'm willing to lay up to 8 here with Iona, and I'm in on the over, so by total 154.5. 605, 606 on the card. Delaware plays us to St. Peter's. St. Peter's is a underdog of 5 to 5.5 points. 143.5 to 144.5 is the total, and for the Blue Hens, I set them as a 5-point favorite. So here at a 5.5 plus, I'm going to be willing to take the points with St. Peter's. St. Peter's consistently a top 75 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I know that they've had a few less than savory results to begin the season, as they just got completely bludgeoned in that game against Seton Hall, losing that 77-50. But I do think that they're going to be able to rebound a little bit here, currently outside the top 290 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That shows you that they're playing slowly, but they are really not efficient on the defensive side of things. And for Delaware, they took a loss against non-Division I Delaware of, if I'm not mistaken, like Wilmington or something. Like, it was a non-Division I team that was less than tremendous. Looked a little bit better in their road game against BYU, but Delaware last year was one of the top 3-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. John Camden and company over there, and they've managed to be able to build off of it even with losing Camden. They're shooting over 39% from 3-point, but I do think that that's in for a little bit of regression, and they're just flat out not doing anything else well. Last year, Delaware was well outside the top 275 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They're really giving it up right now, as they've been allowing their opponents to shoot over 35% from 3, and the 39% 3-point shooting is against D1 teams, against the non-D1 foe in Delaware, Wilmington. That dropped their numbers quite a bit, but right now they're looking at Christian Bliss along Jameel Brown to really headline things in the backcourt. Brown is a guy that's been around the block, began his career over at Penn State, over at Temple, just was unable to stay healthy in the 8 games they actually played. They actually gave the team like 5 points, 37% 3-point shooting, so have some upside there, but you just don't have a lot of size with this team. Right now, you're looking at Tyler Hauser, who began his career over at VMI, and a few seasons ago gave that team 11 points, 5 boards, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range to really hold it down low. Meanwhile, for St. Peter's, this is always a team that's pretty rough and tumble down low. They do lose that main big man from a season ago in Mohamed So, but you know that there's still going to be some size with Jaquan Ewing coming in. He at 6'9", should be able to do a nice job hitting the boards. I know he's only 6'7", but Ja'Kai Gupton has come from the non-D1 ranks. He's been able to give this team some relatively good rebounding as well. And then Brett Bland, he just makes things happen. Last season, he was a nice this and that sort of guy who was supplying the team with like 4.5 points, 3 boards off the bench, dealt with a lot of injuries. 2 years ago as a little bit more of a part-time starter, very similar numbers with a little bit over a steal per contest. And with St. Peter's, with them being a little bit smaller this season, I do think that they're going to be looking to generate a few more turnovers. As of right now, they've been turning the opponents over about 14 times per game, which is a little bit above average for them. They're still doing a good job bringing up grab offensive rebounds, and as per usual, the team has been relatively rough with their offense outside the top 250 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. So very interesting ordeal here. You've got a Delaware team that wants to run, and they're a little bit more offense oriented against this St. Peter's team as a little bit more defensive. As a result, set my line at 5. I'm going to be willing to take 5.5 plus here with St. Peter's. I think that they slow things down. Made my total 143, so I'm in on the under. 607, 608 on the card. You had Xavier playing us to Old Dominion. Old Dominion, a 9 to a 9.5 point underdog. And total on this game, you're finding it between 149.5 to a 150.5, and I made a total of 143.5. I do like the under. Old Dominion last year was in the bottom 5 in all of college basketball in terms of the 3-point shooting percentage, and I recognize that the Old Dominion defense thus far has been a little bit lackadaisical. Right now, they're well outside the top 175 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis by their opponents, but that said, they faced off against George Washington to begin the season. They had that game a few nights ago. That really hurts them, and I do think that this team is going to be a little bit better moving forward. You've got a guy in Caleb Sweatin Roger, who down low last year gave you a block and a half, 6+ rebounds per game. This is a team that should be able to generate those second and third chances on the offensive boards, as well as last year they were 21st in all of college basketball in terms of percentage of their missed shots that they grabbed as an offensive rebound, and that should be able to play well against a Xavier Xavier team as right now 299th in the country in terms of rebound percentage, but I did set my line here at a 9.5. At a 9 or less, I will be willing to lay with Xavier. I do think that there's a little bit of a bounce back here for this Musketeers unit. It's been a rough year for them on offense as they're looking to a lot of mid-major guys like Malik Moore, who comes over from Montana, Trey Carroll, he was rock solid over at Florida Atlantic, and he was very alright over at Valparaiso, but these are not necessarily guys that have a lot of power conference experience. You've got Robbie Anderson, who comes over after he spent some time over at Boise St 2 seasons ago. Last year, he was in the program, but he got injured. He's been one of the main headliners with about 13.5 points per contest for Xavier, only shooting about 32% from three, so they've left something to be desired with that regard, but they're generating turnovers, over 15 turnovers per game, and I do think that they're going to be a little bit improved down low when it's all said and done. Phil Brachevin, he's someone that comes on over from New Mexico with Richard Pitino at 6'9". You've got 6'10" Jovan Milosilovic, who he comes over from New Mexico as well, and then on the other end for Old Dominion, it's just been a little bit rough with regards to this offense because they've been dealing with some injuries in the backcourt. Their main scorer from a season ago has not really been able to get going the way that you'd want him to, and Robert Davis, who's only been able to average about 5.5 points per contest. You've got Casey Shaw and LJ Thomas. Shaw comes over from Maryland Eastern Shore. LJ Thomas, they come in tandem. Both of these guys very much used to having the ball in their hands. They've combined for about 30 points per contest, but still not a great three-point shooting team, and for this bunch in Old Dominion, they're really not generating a lot of turnovers as well. Only about 10.5 turnovers generated per game, but that said, they've been able to do a nice job guarding the three-point line, so I think that this is a little bit of a sloppier game. I do think that the backcourt of Xavier does win out in this game, so I set my line at 9.5. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 9 with them, but with regards to total, main mine at 143.5. I like the under. 6-9, 6-10 on the card. It is Boston College, and they play us at Hampton. Hampton finds themselves as a pretty good-sized underdog here of 11 to 11.5 points. 138.5 to 139 is the total, and I did set a total of 144.5. I do like the over for Hampton. Not necessarily an up-tempo team. We've seen over the last few seasons this become a team that's well outside the top 175 in terms of total possessions per game. Still not necessarily the most efficient defense in the world. Last year they were well outside the top 150 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Despite being a little bit better on the glass, this year they've taken a half a step back, about 210th with regards to rebound percentage, and they face off against Boston College team that's actually been relatively solid in terms of their rebounding, as you've got Donald Hand, who does a little bit of everything, giving you about 16 points, 7.5 boards, so you like that, but bringing in Bowden Kapke, who is a part-time starter over at Butler at 6'11", he's able to pop a few threes, he's been able to give the team 5 rebounds per game. That's helped them be able to elevate a little bit, and a lot of the ancillary pieces like an Aiden Shaw, Jaden Hastings, these are guys that stand about 6'8", 6'9". Shaw comes over from Missouri, where he just didn't see a lot of run over the last few seasons, and for Hampton, they're going to have a tough time with that, as you've got Xavier Long, who I like. Last year was giving the team 6.5 points, 6.5 boards, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range at 6'7", but you really don't have anyone with size other than Josh Ogundele, who he missed the first few games of the season, comes on over from Tennessee State, a rock-solid player down low, but he's been dealing with those injury issues. You're right now having a bunch that just doesn't necessarily shoot at the world's greatest from three-point range, like Christian Watson is a former top 250 recruit of Miami. Last year he was over at Southern Miss, where he gave the team 8 points, 4 boards, but he also shot 23% from three-point range, so you've got a lot of issues with that regard. JaKale Gaines-Wyatt, who comes over from Alcorn St, double-figure scorer, not a bad three-point shooter, but certainly not amazing as well. And then you've got Daniel Johnson, who's been in the program over the last few years. Last year gave the team 7.5 points, mid-30s 3-point shooter, 3 rebounds per game, but I think that Boston College is going to do a nice job inside. They've got the best player out there on the floor in Donald Dan, and I think that they're looking to avenge what happened to them last week when they lost at home to Central Connecticut. I think that this Hampton team just not quite where they were on the glass in past seasons, and I do think that they're going to give up a lot on the inside. Semi-total 144.5. I like the over, and with Boston College, I'm going to lay up to 12 with them. 6-11, 6-12 on the card. Florida State plays us UT Martin. The Skyhawks are a 22 to a 23-point underdog. Tonight's game is 162.5, seeing a 23.5 out there as well. Give me the Skyhawks of UT Martin. I set them as a 15.5-point underdog, and for UT Martin, they've already got a nice road win under their belt. They started out the year going on the road, getting the job done against UNLV, and I don't know if they're going to be able to get an outright win here, but for this UT Martin team, they are very much the international man of mystery, as you've got guys from 13 different countries pretty much playing in tandem with one another, and I do think that for Tennessee Martin, they're going to do a nice job in terms of being able to hold in there because they've done a nice job of being able to shut down the three-point line. Opponents are right now shooting less than 25% from three-point range against this Tennessee Martin team, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the biggest mainstay in the world, but they're clearly doing a great job with regards to all their size around the perimeter, and that's exactly what Jeremy Schulman, who comes on up from the junior college ranks, has always been trying to implement. Having a lot of guys that stand like 6'6" to 6'8" that are able to do a little bit of everything out there on the floor, and they've been able to find a really good one in Andre Bramusovic. Hopefully I said that correct. He last year was a nice ancillary piece, 6 points per contest. Hard to say the name, but easy to know that he's making a nice impact for the team, as right now he's giving you 20 points, 6.5 rebounds per game, and then you've had Drongos Langu, who's been able to do a really good job after he began his career over at San Diego. He's been able to give this team a little bit of leadership in the backcourt, 17 points, 5.5 boards, a steal and a half per contest, shooting in the mid-30s from three-point. Just not a UT Martin team that's going to completely light you up from three, but they're a very sustainable, shooting 38% from three-point range sort of team. I think when it's all said and done, probably going to be closer to 35, 36%, but you've got multiple ball handlers out there on the floor, and they face off against a Florida State team that, in their 2 wins that they've had at home, they were facing off against Alcorn St and Alabama State. They were shooting over 40% from three. That's why they were able to score over 100 points in both of those games. Luke Lux comes on up from the NBA ranks. He's looking to push tempo. You've got pretty much an all-star cast of mid-major guys like Robert McRae, who was over at Jacksonville last year, gave that team 18 plus points per contest, completely stuffed the stat sheet. Kobe McGee was a nice three-point shooter over at Drexel. Lajay Jones was that main three-point shooter over at St. Bonaventure, but now they have to deal with a team that's able to match all of their 6'6", 6'7" size. You've got, for this bunch, a guy in Chancey Wiggins who's 6'10". He's able to pop it from three, and he's relatively okay on the glass, but Florida State about 200th in the country in terms of rebound percentage. UT Martin should be able to hold their own down low, and that allows them to be able to hold in there. I do think that you get very much an up and down game. Florida State is looking to gun it right now. They're in the top 40 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. So I told 163.5. I like that over, and I do like the points here with the Skyhawks. 613, 614 on the card. UNC Wilmington plays us East Carolina. East Carolina 6.5 point underdog. Total on this game between 148 to 148.5, and I set Wilmington as a 7.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to lay this 6 to 6.5 for East Carolina. It just all comes down to the fact that this team is no good whatsoever from beyond the perimeter. With East Carolina, they're always rock solid with their defense. They're always rock solid in terms of being able to hit the boards, but they're right now shooting 18.3% from three. Now I'm going to go out here on a limb and say that they shoot better than 18.3% from three this season, but they were outside the top 300 in this regard last year, and they were outside the top 300 in terms of guarding the arc. They're outside the top 250 once again with this regard. They just don't learn that you need to actually do something from the perimeter. How hard is it to realize that after all the follies of last season? You bring in Giovanni Amaruju, who is giving you about 6 rebounds per game over at George Mason. He's rock solid, and Jordan Riley's back from a season ago, and he's the antithesis of what I'm talking about. He does a lot of things well. Last year for this team, 2 steals, 14.5 points, 6 rebounds per game. He shot 24% from 3-point range. He's a career 23% three-point shooter. That was actually above average for him. So, that's exactly what's happening with the team. They tried to help a little bit from the outside, and I said he comes on over from William & Mary, America's favorite tag team, but on a William & Mary team that just hoisted up 3 after 3, he shot 32% from 3. What are we doing here? And then on the flip side of things, you've got a Wilmington team that last year was just absolutely dominant on the glass. They were a top 25 team with regards to rebound percentage. They might take a half a step back this season as they lose the 7-footer in Harlan Obiana, but how do you replace him? Patrick Wessler, 7-footer from Virginia Tech, a former top 250 recruit. He comes in, and this is pretty much a, shall we say, who's who of sort of CAA transfers. You bring in Christian May, who was a rock-solid defender over at Towson last season. Madison Durr was a nice number 2 scorer over at Monmouth, 12.5 points, shot 39% from 3-point range, 3 boards, 3 assists per contest. And you bring in Nolan Hodge. He was one of the top guys for the team a season ago last year. He was able to shoot 37% from 3, 4 boards, 7.5 points per contest as a part-time starter. He's your main holdover from a season ago, along with Noah Ross as well. Noah Ross was a guy that he was in a smaller role off the bench, was able to give you 8 points. He was able to throw in their 5 boards. I really do like this Wilmington team. I think that they're able to match what East Carolina does on the boards, and East Carolina just no 3-point shooting to be had right now, so I'm going to be willing to lay it here with UNC Wilmington. I did set my total 147.5, so you're at the 148. I just don't think that East Carolina knocks down the threes needed for the over. I like the under to go along with Wilmington. 6:15, 6:16 on the board. It is Towson on the road against James Madison. James Madison, a home underdog of 2.5 to 3 points. 135.5 is the total. I set James Madison as the 1.5 point favorite. I do like them on the money line. Now for James Madison, it's been a little bit rough first few games of the season, but keep in mind, they were actually leading for like the first 30 or so minutes of that game to start the season against an Akron team that we are finding out is very, very rock solid. They gave up 80 points in that one, but I do think that the defense is going to be able to restore order. Last year, James Madison was well outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game. I think that they're going to be getting back to the roots, and when you face off against the Towson team that's very defense-oriented, last year they were in the top 60 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They're outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game. I think that that's going to cause for a little bit more of a slog in this one, so I set my total 135.5. This actually opened up at a 138, so if you can get in on a 136 or less, I'm going to be willing to take a shot on that under, but you do take a look at what you're getting across the board for this James Madison team, and you've got a guy in Eddie Ricks who has been in the Preston Spradlin system all the way back to when he was over at Morehead State. He's been able to give you about 6.5 rebounds per game. Bradley Douglas and Cliff Davis are learning to play with one another in the backcourt. Davis comes on over after he was with Northwestern State along with UT Rio Grande Valley as a nice sort of off-the-ball guy that would give you 13 points, as well he's been about a 38% three-point shooter. And then Bradley Douglas over at Georgia Southern last few seasons, he was able to be a solid double-figure scorer that would give up more like 2.5 assists per contest. Never been an amazing three-point shooter, but grabs a few boards, was able to generate a little bit over a steal per contest last season as well. And on the other end, you do have a Towson team that they bring back so much of what you had from a season ago. Tyler Tejada, a nice double-figure scorer. You've got out of the fold Christian May, who did transfer on over to UNC Wilmington, but that's a Dylan Williamson, nice double-figure scorer. They did lose a little bit down low, though, and you had a lot of guys that would stand just 6'8", 6'9", like for a Tuwaimi, Solomon, Makai, Lowry, guys like this, that they would always do just such a good job. Messiah Jones in terms of being able to hit the boards, and that's what you're missing a little bit more this season with this team. Now that said, you've had Chike Ndefu come in, and he's been able to give the team about 5 boards per contest, so I like what I'm seeing there. And Abdou Sam, he's been in the program for quite a while, just has not been able to find a lot of minutes. And then the 7-footer who began his career over at Hawaii, Mo Sek, he's not going to give you a lot on offense. He's going to be pretty rock solid on defense. I think that you get a little bit of a slog of a game, but in the end, because Towson did lose some of that front court from a season ago, and I do think that James Madison is finding their way, and Towson also shooting 27% from three-point range. I do think that James Madison perseveres here. I did set them as 1.5 point favorite, like James Madison on the money line, and 136 or less, I like the under. 6:17, 6:18 on the card. It is Eastern Michigan, and they're going to be on the road against Detroit. Detroit is a 1 to 1.5 point home underdog. Totals between 153.5 to 154, and made Detroit the 2-point favorite. Give me another home underdog on the money line, as for Eastern Michigan, I just have never been a stan of Stan Heath. Like, I did not like the hire at the time, and you lose pretty much those two guys that were the engine that made them run a season ago in Jalen Terry along to Sean Nelson, and now you're having to look to Addison Patterson along John Sanders, a pair of guys that were over at Northwestern St a season ago to take ownership of this team. Patterson has been very versatile, 15 points, 2.5 assists, 5 boards, much of what he did last season over at Northwestern State. Currently shooting 57% from 3. I can tell you right now that that's going to be going way downward, and I do think that the team's overall 28% three-point shooting is going to be going a little bit northward, as McMahon Seal, it's a revenge game for him. Last season, he was over at Detroit, bit of an injury-riddled season. In 12 games, he was able to give that team 11 points, shot over 40% from three-point range, so he should be able to elevate that a little bit, but Eastern Michigan last year was outside the top 300 in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage. They're right back there this season. Always have been outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and for Detroit, a little bit of a new look backcourt, but you do bring back Mr. Do-It-All from a season ago in Orlando Lovejoy. I know he's dealt with a little bit of injury, but that said, last year gave the team 15 points, 5 boards, just does a whole bunch of this and that. He was able to get back out there on the floor in that game against Toledo, so he should be all good to go in this one. And TJ Nadu, he's back after last season. He was a nice part-time starter as a freshman, 9 points, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range, and I do think that Coach Montgomery starting to get things a little bit more online for Detroit. They do leave a lot to be desired down low, and Addison Patterson, he should be able to win that battle down low, but it's not like Eastern Michigan has a lot of size. They've always been a really rough rebounding team as well, and I do think that there's a little bit of upside here here with Nate Johnson back from season ago. He last year for this Detroit team as a starter, 9 points, 4.5 boards. Not necessarily an amazing three-point shooter, but he plays bigger than his size. He should be able to help out down low, and I did think that in the end, Detroit is doing a little bit more with regards to their defense. They're doing a little bit more on the glass. They find a way to persevere in a game where I don't think either of these teams are going that far, but I did set Detroit as a 2-point favorite. I like them on the money line. Semi-total at 150 as well. Been very spotty with regards to the Eastern Michigan three-point shooting, so in on the under and Detroit on the money line. 619, 620 on the card. Battle of Georgia. Georgia Southern's on the road against Georgia Tech. The Yellow Jackets are an 11.5 point home favorite. 165.5 to 166.5 is your total, and I set a total here of a 155.5. I like the under. Georgia Tech is not playing with a lot of pace. We saw that when they went to overtime against Maryland Eastern Shore to begin the season, and neither team got past 60. Now, Maryland Eastern Shore is a very extreme team this season. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but that said, even with an overtime game under your belt, and that really elevates the amount of possessions that you've got in a game, Georgia Tech's still outside the top 45 in terms of total possessions per game. Now, Georgia Southern's gutting it. Georgia Southern is 16th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. They're sort of in take-no-prisoners sort of mode, but that said, this is a Georgia Tech team that's played okay with regards to their defense, as you got Peyton Ndongo down low. He's a very rock-solid big man that is able to give you 9.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. I recognize that he's been a little bit banged up to begin the season, so that has provided a little bit of strife for this team, and their numbers are very much warped by the fact that they had to play against Georgia a few nights ago as well. That's a game that they actually held in, and Ndongo was out there on the floor for that game as well, so he should be all good to go here. You've got Kawasi Reeves, who's been able to give you 13.5 points per contest. He's shooting right around 42% from three for a Georgia Tech team that they're allowing opponents to shoot 20.9% from three. That's going to be going northward. Let's call it what it is, but I mean, that said, they've been able to do a nice job in terms of guarding the perimeter because they do have a lot of guys with size. Reeves is 6'6". Cam Kraft shot over 40% from three over at Miami of Ohio. He's 6'6", so they've got length around the perimeter. You've got Lamar Washington, who's a larger point guard at 6'4". Now, he did turn the ball over darn near 4 times per contest over at Pacific last year, but he does have some size. And then for Georgia Southern, this bunch, I do think is going to be able to do a relatively solid job of holding in there down low, despite the fact that Peyton Ndongo is back in the fold. You've got someone that I really like in Kavian White, who provides just a little bit of everything. Last season, he was able to be a solid double-figure scorer for the team, and he provided about 3.5 boards, shot in the mid-30s from three-point. She's up to about 14.5 points per game this season. I think the big key is Alden Applewhite, who he comes over after he was at Murray State the last few seasons. Guy that had 6'7", would always give you like 3 or 4 boards. He provided them with 6 points per contest, career 34% three-point shooter, so good versatility there. And you've got Tavarius Spud Webb, who's been able to dole out about 4 assists per game. Now, Georgia Southern, they're playing fast, but they are playing a little bit loose with regards to the offense, as this is a team that is not generating a lot of offensive rebounds, that they themselves are giving up 17 offensive rebounds per game, so they're giving up a lot of second and third chances. That's honestly savory, but that said, with Georgia Tech, I could always set them as a 9.5 point favorite. That offense, without Nathan George, has been looking for a little bit of, shall we say, direction, so I'm in on the under, so I total 155.5, and I'm taking the points with Georgia Southern. 621, 622 on the card. Abilene Christian is on the road against Texas A. Texas A is a pick-em to a 1.5 point favorite. Total on this game, it is 140 to 140.5, and I did set Texas A as a 3.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. For Texas State, this is always a pretty rock-solid defense, and they had some good three-point shooting last year, but this is always a team that they always have one of the lower three-point shot rates. That's merely the percentage of your shots that you take from three-point range, and I'm not quite sure why, because you've got a guy, Mark Drone, who was a really good junior college transfer. He was very limited last year to like 10 games due to injury, but he's a guy that's really able to bomb it from three-point range. Caden Gums is back after he gave you 10 points. He was a mid-30s three-point shooter as well, but this is always a team that they like to pound the interior a little bit more, with Texas State currently 336th in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that come from three-point range, and that's actually, I think, going to be able to work against an Abilene Christian team that year in and year out, they just don't do a good job on the glass because they're always gambling for turnovers. Abilene Christian last year was number 1 in all of college basketball in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but they lost very late on in the offseason. Keon Williams, he was kicked off the team in August. He was that top scorer from a season ago, so Braden Hubbard now has to take ownership of this team. 16 points, 5 boards, 3 assists to begin the season. It's an Abilene Christian team that never really has great three-point shooting, but they've been better on the boards this season. A little bit of that is a byproduct of the fact that they have played 2 non-Division I teams to really warp their numbers, and when they played against a real team in Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin, they lost that game by 10, but I like the pickup of Joe Van Sant. He last season just wasn't able to get out there on the floor due to injury, but you look at what he did over at Liberty during the 2023-24 campaign where he was fully healthy, 5 points, 6 boards, steal per contest. Should be able to give this team a little bit more pop down low, but that said, you do lose a lot of those guys that were able to give you something from the perimeter. So Rich Smith, who's a good facilitator, he's not going to really have anyone to pass to, and for Texas State, even though this isn't a team with quite the size that they've had in the past, I do think that they win that battle down low. You've been able to get about 6 rebounds per game out of DJ Turner-Paul, who's been a really nice freshman for this team. Makai Willis, he comes on over with Jalen Bolden. Both of these guys were over at Louisiana Monroe, and Bolden has not really found his footing in the rotation, only about 4 points per contest, but Makai Willis last year at 6'9" at Monroe, 10.5 points, 7.5 boards, steal per contest, shot 36% from 3-point range. He's been sort of a do-it-all sort of guy, and I do think that that wins out in this game. It's going to be an Abilene Christian team that is going to be able to get their fair share of turnovers, but for Texas State, they've been a team that they themselves have been able to generate about 14 turnovers per game. I do think that you get quite a bit of sloppiness in this game, but I do think that things are going to be a little bit more up and down. We've been noticing Texas State playing a little bit faster than they have in the past, so I did set my total at 147.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on the over, and Texas State willing to lay up to 3 with them. 6.3, 6.4 on the card. UT Arlington is on the road against Evansville. The Purple Aces of Evansville are 2.5 point favorites. 141.5 is the total, and set a total here of 147. I do like the over. Now for Evansville, bottom half of all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game, and year in and year out, this team has just lost so many of their good scorers. Like last year, you had a pair of guys leave via the transfer portal in Tayshaun Comer, who was giving you 16 points per contest. You lose Gabriel Pizzato, but you do retain Connor Turnbull, who was last year 9 points, 4 boards per contest, actually began his career at the Power Conference level. He was playing for Butler at 6'10" to be able to begin his career, so that helps out. And Joshua Hughes last year was able to give you 5 boards per game, so even though you do lose much of that backcourt from the season ago, they do have a lot of the front court back from last season, and they've had A.J. Casey come over from Miami along with St. Louis, where he was a former top 100 recruit, just never really found a good role there. He's been able to spy this team 10 points per contest. Evansville is going to leave something to be desired from 3 right now, shooting about 31% from the outside, but they do face off against a unit that I've got my question marks with on the defensive side of things in UT Arlington, because under this KT turn it down for what style, they've always been outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and they lost 9 of their top 10 scorers from a season ago. Rayshon Semester is like the lone guy that returns from last year, and he's been solid to begin the year. 17.5 points, 7 boards per contest, but you are having a lot of guys that haven't necessarily been ball handlers, needing to be in that a little bit more. Paschil Laster, he comes in, he's been able to give you about 10 points, 2.5 assists per game. But Marcel McCreary, he was very rock solid over at Northern Colorado last year, came off the bench, was a 6th man that shot 41% from 3, 8 points, 3.5 boards per contest, but right now he's leading the way in terms of assists, and that's going to cause for things to be a little bit more wonky with this offense. UT Arlington, year in and year out, outside the top 250 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis, and right now they're turning the ball over 16 times per game, and they're allowing opponents to shoot 19% from 3. That is going to be going way, way, way northward, I can assure you of that. I do like the fact that Tyron Mason has been able to come over from North Texas. He's been able to give the team about 7.5 points per contest after he was just very limited last season, but that said, with this Evansville team, I do think that they are going to be able to persevere here against an Arlington team that is going to be seeing a lot of regression with regards to that 3-point shooting defense, and they lose just so much from a season ago. So I did set my line at 5. I'm going to be willing to lay with Evansville, and like the over, set my total 147. 6.25, 6.26 on the card. Yale is playing us to Rhode Island. Rhode Island finds itself as a pretty sizable underdog of 7.5 to 8.5 points. So on this game, it is between 157 to 157.5. Did set a total of 158.5. I like the over for Rhode Island. They've been looking to crank up their tempo over the last few seasons under Archie Miller, a guy that he had that great run over at Dayton where he led them to the Elite Eight, and then he got exposed as a coach. So that's not been great, to say the least. And for this Rhode Island team, you take a look at the defense this year, and it's been not great in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They are 59th in the country, but they had that game against Tulsa where they got completely bludgeoned. The rest of their games, they came against a lower level of competition. Meanwhile, you've got a Yale team that is just absolutely lighting teams up on offense. They go on the road, they lambase Quinnipiac by 25 25 plus. They go on the road, they land base Navy by 25 plus points. This is a Yale team that's really rocking and rolling. They're a top 25 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. You bring back Nick Towson, who at 6'6", 6'7", is able to shoot the high 30s from three. He gave the team 15 points, 6 boards per contest last season. And additionally, you've got Isaac Salazar, who's 6'6". He's now giving you 13 points per contest. Riley Fox has come from out of nowhere to give this team 19 points per game. You still have some leadership in the backcourt. Casey Simmons, who began his career over at Northwestern, he's always been a nice this and that sort of guy. Saw some more minutes last season. He's playing the team with 9 points per contest. And with regards to this Yale team, they're absolutely owning the boards right now. They're allowing opponents to grab just 8 offensive rebounds per game, so they've been able to do a nice job there. It's not even like this Yale team is necessarily gunning it. They're a pretty mid-tempo team. They were last season as well. I anticipate that being the same now. The Yale defense, with all their offense, has taken a little bit of a step back last year outside the top 125 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, so I did set a little bit of a higher total here of a 158.5. I do like the over, and for Rhode Island, they brought in some nice pieces I actually like. You had to replace Xavier Green from the season ago, a very unenviable task, but there's a lot of guys individually, like Tyler Cochran, who 2 seasons ago over at Toledo was averaging 14 points per contest. Jonah Hinton was very much hinting at hard with regards to St. Bonaventure as a starter, 8.5 points. He shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. He's a nice ancillary guard. Keenan Edegiri, last season over at Northern Colorado, was able to give you like 5 or so rebounds per game. Miles Corey over at South Alabama threw in their 14 points. Not a great three-point shooter, but will give you a little bit of facilitation. That said, I just take a look at this spot, and Yale is just so well connected in every facet of basketball, and I think that they get the job done here in a high-scoring expose. So I told 158.5. I like the over, and I'm willing to lay up to 10 here with Yale. 627, 628 on the card. Murray State is going to be playing us at Little Rock. Little Rock finds themselves as a little bit of an underdog of 14.5 points, actually more than a little bit of an underdog. Total this game is 161.5. Sorry, total 151.5. I like the under. Now, for Murray State, this is a team that is turning down for nobody whatsoever. They're a top 30 team in terms of total possessions per game, and I absolutely love the fact that you've got Ryan Miller coming over from Creighton and bringing over a pair of guys in Mason Miller, who shot 40+% from three-point range 2 seasons ago over at Creighton, and then you also bring in Frederick King, who in the 4 or 5 starts that he got, he was averaging 3 blocks per contest for Creighton. He was just lost in the shadow of Ryan Kalkbrenner over there, but this is a Murray State team that very much has this going with regards to their offense. They've been a top 75 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis to go along with that tempo. At home, they've been a pretty solid defense. They've got a home points allowed on a per possession basis defensive efficiency metric in the top 50, so I do think that they're going to be able to hold up there, but they do face off against a Little Rock team that they once again lose K.K. Robinson, their top scorer from 2 seasons ago, for the 2nd straight year, so that's a little bit rough, and once again, this Little Rock team is playing a little bit more controlled as a result. Right now for Little Rock in terms of total possessions per game, 301st in all of college basketball, and Little Rock was a very rock-solid defense last year that left a lot to be desired on offense. Last year, Little Rock was outside the top 275 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Despite their low-tempo style, they were turning the ball over about 14 times per contest, but they did a great job in terms of D'ing up. Little Rock has been struggling a little bit more with the defense this year, currently 300th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That should be improving a little bit more as they had a tough game against Marquette. They had to play against UW Milwaukee. They bounced back very nicely against Ball State, and they bring back Jonathan Lawson from a season ago. Lawson was able to give that team about 14 to 15 points per game. 5 boards, actually began his career over at Creighton as well. And I like the pickup of Braxton Bayless. Bayless was a season ago over at Western Kentucky. Bit of a do-it-all guy for them. About 8 points, 3 boards, 2 assists, shot over 40% from 3-point. So you should be able to elevate that offense a little bit more. Once again, with this Little Rock team, 18 turnovers per game this season. They just have no direction whatsoever. And I just think that you get too many dead possessions for the over, but you've got Tunkan Gakic, who he's been around the block. He began his career over at Florida, Tennessee State. He's able to give you about 5 boards a block per contest. I think that that's just enough for this Little Rock team to be able to hold in there. I think that they do so with their defense. Somebody told 151.5. I like the under. And with Little Rock 12 plus, I'm going to take those points. 629, 630 on the board. It is the battle of directional northerns. Northern Illinois is on the road against Northern Iowa. And Northern Iowa is the favorite here of 20.5 points. So on this game, it is 144 and made Northern Iowa the 18.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take the points. Northern Iowa getting back to their roots. Last year, they're outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game, but this is also a Northern Iowa team that they were a top 40 team with regards to their 3-point shooting percentage last year, and they bring back a lot of those guys from a season ago. Leon Bond has been able to give you 15.5 points, began his career over at Virginia. Right now, Northern Iowa is allowing opponents to shoot 20.5% from 3. That's going to be going northward. Last year, they were an okay defense, but they weren't necessarily great. But you do have Trey Campbell, who's a do-it-all sort of Swiss Army knife guy. Last year, 11.5 points, 4 boards, 3 assists, steal and a half per contest, shot 43% from three-point range. So I like what he brings to the table for this bunch. Now, for Northern Iowa, they don't do a great job of giving themselves second and third chances, and you really don't have a lot of size. After last season, you were able to get a little bit more down low with Jacob Hudson at 6'11", able to grab a few boards. You don't have as much of that with Will Hornseth at 6'8", needing to see quite a few minutes. And you've got Ben Schwieger, who's back. He's been able to get the team double figures. But I do think that that's the way that Northern Illinois is going to be able to hold in this game. I did set my line at 18.5. I'm willing to take the points, as they actually brought in some guys I like. Jayo Otika, he was very, very way back in the day, like 3 or 4 years ago at Marist, shooting over 40% for three, 15-plus points per contest as a freshman. And ever since then, you just saw with injury. You're bringing a guy in J.J. Taylor, began his career over at Memphis and Central Florida. Saw some solid minutes over at Central Florida last year. Gave that team 4.5 points, a pair of boards, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range as a 6'7", 6'8", do-it-all sort of player. I like him. And then you've got Gustav Winther, who comes over from Denmark, 6'10" big man. I don't think he's going to quite be Yannick Konen-Niederhauser, but he's giving you a little bit of something down low as well. And this is a Northern Illinois team that last year was dead last in all of college basketball in terms of offensive rebound percentage. They should be a little bit better there, but defense, once again, very lackadaisical. They're giving up over 80 points per contest. They are allowing teams to just have their way with them down low outside the top 300 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. So I do think that you get a very nice high-scoring game. Northern Illinois last year was a top 75 team in terms of total possessions per game, and I think that they're going to look to crank it up a little bit. I do think that they're going to have a little bit of success with it, so I'm going to be willing to take anything north of 19 here of Northern Illinois. And in the Battle of Northerns, we're going to be going north with this total. I'd like the over, set my total 154.5. 631, 632 on the card. Texas A&M plays host to Montana. The Grizzles find themselves as an underdog of 14.5 to 15.5 points. 164.5 is the total. Did set a total of 161.5. I'm going to be in on the under. For Montana last year, they cranked up their tempo a little bit to about 100th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And Texas A&M under Bucky McMillan, you know that they're going to want to run. But for this Montana team, I actually think that they might be a little bit improved on the defensive side of things. They're allowing opponents to shoot less than 30% from three. I don't know if that's going to quite be a mainstay, but they do need to be a little bit better on defense because they did lose guys like Malik Moore and company from a season ago. But you've got Money Williams, who he was a big part of their upset win over UNLV over the weekend. He's been able to average 20 points per contest. Last year, about 13 points, 3 assists. Wasn't an amazing three-point shooter. And for Montana right now, they're shooting less than 30% from three-point range as a collective. You do have a little bit of versatility with Tajon Sawyer, who stands 6'8", back in the fold after he last season was able to supply this team with 9.5 points, shot 40% for three, 4 boards per contest. Like what he's able to bring to the table. For Montana, year in and year out, they always don't do a great job in terms of generating second and third chances for themselves because they play a lot of positionless basketball. You can expect a little bit more of that this year. You look to Keenan Oguino, who comes on over from New Mexico. He's been able to give the team 10 points per contest. The state of New Mexico, he did not play for the Lobos, but from the state of New Mexico. And then on the other end, you've got a Texas A&M team that just feels like they're trying to figure out their rotations at this point. They've been playing like 10 different guys for 12 plus minutes. It just has been rudderless with them. You have had Mackenzie Mbakbo be out of the fold for this team. If he does play in this game, he's going to be rather limited. And you've got a lot of guys give you double figures right now. Rashawn Agee, who comes on over from Bowling Green, 12 points, 5 boards, spent some time at USC last season. Rylan Griffin is a guy that's been around the block. He's right now giving out 3.5 assists, spent some time over at Kansas and Alabama, 6'5", a little bit of a combo player. And you've got really good versatility there. But for Federico so nice they named him twice, and Zach Clemens, they just don't feel like guys that really fit this Bucky McMillan system because his team is up-tempo, trying to generate turnovers, and they're clunkier big men, and Pop Isaacs has not really done a lot for the team. Ali Abdu-Diba joined the process late, so you've got a little bit of rudderlessness with this Texas A&M team. They're generating 16 turnovers per game, so they're doing a relatively solid job there, but when they don't generate turnover, they're giving up on the looks from three, and I think that Montana holds in there in a game that gets a little bit sloppier. I did set my line at a 17.5. I do think that in the end, just the overall talent of Texas A&M is going to be able to win out. Might be a bit of a letdown spot after Montana had that triumph against UNLV as well. So I'm going to be willing to lay up to 17 here with Texas A&M, and with the Girls of total set mine at a 161.5. I'm in on the under 633, 634 on the card. Iowa is going to be playing us the Southeast Missouri St. SEMO is a 24.5 point underdog. Total on this game is 149.5 to a 150, and with Southeast Missouri State, I did set them as a underdog of 22 points. I'm going to be willing to take those points with Iowa. It's been very impressive what we've seen from them this season, and I mean, Ben McCollum, this guy can just flat out coach. He has brought with him a lot of guys that were so integral to his success over at the Drake last season. You've got Bennett shirts, who was last year 16 plus points, 5 plus boards, 4 plus assists, doing a little bit of everything, and right now he's giving the team 21 plus points per contest, but bringing in there Alvaro Folgarius, who last season he was playing over at Robert Morris at 6'9", shot it at like 40% from 3, was giving that team 8 plus rebounds, 16 plus points per game. He's fit like a glove for this team. And then Tavion Banks, Cam Maniwu, who were over at Drake from a season ago, they've done a nice job just being able to fill their roles as well. For Iowa, they're not playing up tempo. Once again, outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game. I don't think they're going to be dead last in terms of total possessions per game, but they're shooting 66% on their 2-point shots, and that's really been the difference. But I do think that a Southeast Missouri State team that does a typically very good job of being able to cut you off from the perimeter and just is a very well-connected sort of team, a tough-nosed team. I do think that they do just enough to be able to in there. You do lose your top scorer from Rob Martin from a season ago, but Braxton Stecker has been in the system for quite a while. He's right now supplying the team with 13 points per contest. For SEMO, they're shooting 28% from three-point range. I think that improves a little bit, but they've never been a team that really lights you up from three. BJ Ward, though, is a guy that's been around the block a little bit. He's been able to give this team right around about 11.5 points per contest this year. After last year, mid-33-point shooter, 8.5 points, 2.5 assists per game. I like what he's able to bring to the table. This is not a team with like super imposing size. Down low, you've got a pair of 7-footers and Elliot Ladowns and David Edoda, who have just not really given you too much whatsoever. So you're looking a little bit more to Brandon Terry, who he's been in the process for the last few seasons. Last year gave the team 11 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. They need him to step it up a little bit down low, but I do think that with Southeast Missouri State, a team that they themselves are very good at generating turnovers. This is a team that last year was in the top 75 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Recognize that they lose Teddy Washington, but you're in the first 4 games of the season. They've generated 70 turnovers in these 4 games. I do think that they do just enough to be a hold in there, and I do think that when these two teams gamble for turnovers and don't get one, that it does lead to some open looks on the other end. And Iowa, even though they play slow, they've been very efficient on offense. Set a total of a 150. I do like the over, and I'm going to be one to take the points here with SEMO. 635, 636 on the card. It is Duke, and they're playing against Kansas at Madison Square Garden. Duke is right now a 10.5 point favorite. Seeing a 10 out there as well. 150.5 to 151.5. Set my line at 7.5, and that was factoring in the fact that I did not think that Darren Peterson was going to be playing in this game, and even with that, I'm going to be one to take the points with Kansas. Yes, for Kansas, having Darren Peterson out of the fold, that hurts them, and we saw them have a little bit of struggle with Princeton in the first half in their game yesterday, but that said, I do think that Kansas is going to be able to do enough to hold in there because the defense has been rock solid. They've been a top 35 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They've been really doing a nice job in terms of guarding the perimeter as they brought in guys that just fit the system. Melvin Council was a nice player over at St. Bonaventure last year. 13 points, 5 boards, 2 steals per contest. Not necessarily a great 3-point shooter, but I mean, he's going to do a good job locking it down. Jaden Dawson comes over from Loyola Chicago. We have seen what they've done without him, and then you've got Flory Badunga down low, giving you about 2.5 blocks per contest at 6'10", one of the main holdovers from last season. And for Duke, they should be able to do a nice job with the Boozer brothers in terms of just having the overall flash in this game. Cameron Boozer, 22.5 points, 10 rebounds per game. His brother Caden is right now a little bit more of an ancillary piece for this team, and Isaiah Evans has been absolutely lighting teams up from 3-point range last year, shot over 41% from 3. He's right now supplying the team with about 13 points per contest. Needs to learn to become a little bit less of a one-trick pony, but that one trick is a very good one. Dame Sarr has good versatility. Obviously, you're going to be able to get good production. Patrick Ngongba down low. Hopefully I said that correct. He's actually been able to pop up quite a few threes as well. He hasn't hit any of them, but he's been popping threes, so he's starting to show that versatility as well. But in the end, I do think that with Kansas having Badunga and company down low, with them really looking to slow down their games, and Duke is not an up-tempo team. Last 2 seasons, they've been outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game. This is a bunch that is in the top 5 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Think you get a little bit of a lower scoring game. Give me the points here with Kansas, and I'm in on the underside. I total 147.5, 637, 638 on the card. Syracuse plays us on Monmouth. Monmouth is an underdog of 19.5 to 20.5 points. 147.5 is the total, and Syracuse made this line 16.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points. Syracuse is actually number 1 in the country right now in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Drexel just completely died in the second half of their game against Syracuse. Drexel held the lead with like 3 minutes remaining in the first half, and then it was wah, 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 wah. They lose that the rest of the game after they got up 31-30 by kind of 50-19. So that was not great to say the least. And this is a Syracuse team that, I mean, to their credit, they're generating over 18 turnovers per game. I don't think that they're going to quite be generating 18 turnovers per game, but 2 years ago, they were a good turnover team. Last year, they weren't generating as many. Currently, they're dealing with an injury to J.J. Starlin, and not having J.J. Starlin might be a good thing for this team. I know that a lot of people don't want to hear it, but you've got a nice point guard, Nathan George, who was able to give Georgia Tech last year about 5 assists per game. He's a decent shooter himself. Kyan Anthony, that is the son of Carmelo Anthony. He, in his 2 starts, has been able to give you like 17 points in both of them. Donnie Freeman, he dealt with injury last season, but he's another top 35 recruit that has been very versatile this year. 17.5 points, 4.5 boards. He's shooting it okay from 3-point range. And this is not a team that's going to necessarily wow you with their threes. Nate Kings, he last year shot over 40% from 3 for Oregon State. He has yet to get things rocking and rolling here, but I mean, overall, it's a really good defensive team. And for Monmouth, the King Rice system typically has one real go-to scorer. You've seen that last few seasons. Xander Wright 2 years ago, Abdi Bashir last year. They really don't have that this year, but they brought back a lot of the ancillary guys, like an Andrew Ball, who's going to give you like 6 boards. He's going to give you an assist. He's going to give you a steal. Jack Collins is another this and that guy. He, over his 3 years over at Monmouth, between 9.3 and 10.7 points per contest every year, averages about 5.5 boards, 2.5 assists, 1.5 steals per game. Not an amazing 3-point shooter, but he does a nice job holding down the fort. And Doc Mortar is back after he gave you over a block per contest at 6'11" a season ago. So I do think that these guys hold in there, and they bring in Jason Rivera-Torres, who actually saw some solid minutes 2 years ago over at Vanderbilt during that 2023-24 campaign. 6.5 points, 3 boards. He was seeing good minutes out there in the SEC, so you do like to see that. And Cornelius Robinson at 6'6" can give you some rebounding as well. I do think that this Monmouth team does just enough to be able to hold in there. It is a Monmouth team that's given up from 3. They're allowing opponents to shoot 35% from the outside, and 16.5 turnovers per game against a Syracuse team that's generating turnovers is a little bit less than savory, but I do think that you are going to see a little bit of a rise with regards to the scoring in this game. Now, I did set my total 146.5. I think we've went a little bit too far at the 147.5. I like the under, but do like the points here with Monmouth in a little bit of a sloppier game. 639, 640 on the card. Texas, they are back to being a big favorite as they play host to Rhode. Rhode is a 29.5 point dog. 143.5 to 145.5 is the total, and set Texas as a 30.5 point favorite. Willing to lay up to 30 with them. Ryder is just once again one of your lesser teams in all of college basketball again. And for Ryder, I've been waiting for Kevin Baggett to be able to get things online for the team, but it's just not happening. You've got Flash Burton and Zion Cruz back from a season ago. These 2 guys in the backcourt are combining for about 24.5 to 25 points per contest, but I mean, they were not great 3-point shooters last year, and right now this team is shooting 18.4% from 3. I think that they're going to shoot better than a hearty 18.4% from 3 this year, but man, that's not great to say the least. And then they lose the Ingrams from a season ago. We're able to do a nice job down low. They do bring in Muhammad Diallo. He's a pretty rock solid 7-foot big man, and I think that he's going to do a nice job holding down the fort for them. And Caleb Smith has been able to give them a little bit of shiftiness at 6'5", 9 points, 8.5 rebounds per game as he comes up from the non-D1 ranks. Both of these guys do, and they've been able to do their part very well. But for Texas, I had a little bit of a question mark as to what they were going to be able to get down low this season. And you've got, coming off of injury, Lucina Traore, where 2 seasons ago over at Long Beach 80 was averaging a double-double, give the team 9 rebounds per game. And from out of nowhere, Mitos Volkaitis, hopefully I said that correct, the international man of mystery, was over at Lithuania last year for Florida Atlantic. He was a solid player with about 10 points, 5.5 boards. He's now given the team 15 points, 8.3 rebounds per game. He has been really good down low for them, and that's big because you know what you're going to get out of Jordan Pope along with Tremont Mark, a pair of guys that last year averaged double figures, and well, Chendell Weaver is not a go-to scorer. Last year, 6.5 points, shot 40% from 3-point. He does a solid job in terms of being able to play off the ball for the team. Simeon Wilcher just never really found his real role over at St. John's. He's been able to give the team a little bit in the backcourt as well. I do think that in the end, Riders, just with their inability to be able to throw it in the basket, they are not going to be able to cover this number against Texas. I do think that Texas gets his job done, and I think that for Texas, a team that's shooting less than 30% from 3, they get online against a Rider team that not only have they been bad with their perimeter offense, they're also a team that they leave a lot to be desired in terms of pressuring the ball. They're only generating about 9 turnovers per game, so I do think that Texas is able to name their score here. I did set my line at a 30.5. I'm willing to lay with Texas. Set my total 148.5. I like the over. 641, 642 on the card. Utah is playing us to Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne, pretty sizable underdog here of 13.5 points. It's on this game between 162 and 162.5, and I'm going to be willing to take the points with Fort Wayne. Utah's had 4 home wins thus far this season, but none of those games have been covers. They got that overtime game against Weber State. Heck, they were getting pushed a little bit by Holy Cross about a few days ago as well. The Alex Jensen system is flowing good offense, but defense is leaving something to be desired, to say the least. They're not really generating any turnovers whatsoever. They're lucky that their opponents are shooting 58.5% at the free throw line. The elevation has to do with that. You do have a nice go-to scorer, though, in Terrence Brown. Last year, he's averaging over 20 points per contest over at Fairleigh Dickinson, and he's been fairly good for this team. He's only shooting 6.7% from three. Again, I think that 6.7% goes a little bit northward, but 24 points, 4 assists per contest. Keno Dawes is giving you 12 rebounds per game, despite the fact that, he's got okay size at 6'9", but he's been able to do a relatively solid job there. But for Fort Wayne, I do think that they're going to be able to hold in there, because other than Dawes, you're not getting a ton down low out of Utah. And for Fort Wayne, this is a team that year in and year out is outside the top 275 with regards to rebound percentage. They could use Maximus Nelson to be able to pick it up, as he's been pretty average as far this season with about 5.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. But even though they lose pretty much an entire backcourt from a season ago, you bring in DeAndre 3000 Craig, who last season he was a double-figure scorer over at Denver. He's been able to get the team 16 points per contest. Mikhail Stevenson is just a hard-nosed guy. Last year over at Grambling, gave that team 11 points, 2 steals, 4 assists per contest, about a 33% three-point shooter. So Purdue Fort Wayne probably going to take a little bit of step back with that three-point shooting, but Corey Hadnot, he's one of the main holdovers from season ago. Last year, he shot about 40% from three and was a nice six-man scorer, and now he's giving you 19.5 points, 3.5 boards, 3 assists, 2.5 steals per game, and that's where Fort Wayne always wins their games. They win the turnover battle. Last year, they were in the top 40 in both turnovers forced on a per possession basis on defense and top 40 in terms of taking care of the ball. Right now, they are averaging 9.4 turnovers per game fewer on offense than they're generating on defense. That's how I think that they're going to be able to hold in this game against Utah. I set my line here at a 12.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points with Fort Wayne. I did set my total 162.5. I do think they can get an up and down game, so at a 162 or less, I'm in on the over to go along with those points with Fort Wayne. 643, 644 on the card. Wichita State is on the road against Boise State. Boise State a 9.5 point favorite total on this game. It is 153.5 and set my line at 5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Wichita State. It goes past the Hawaii Pacific game for Boise State. They had a nip and tuck game against Montana State. It's not the world's worst team. They also pushed Colorado, but we've seen what Colorado is this far this season. But for Boise State, even though they bring in a nice double-figure score from 2 seasons ago over at UCLA and Dylan Andrews, it just feels like that addition has actually been a subtraction for this team, as the team has been much more disjointed on defense than they typically are. Boise State is always typically a top 40 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and they're so rock solid down low. This team last season was number 1 in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Right now, their opponents are grabbing 5.8 offensive rebounds per game, so they've been solid there, but now they're outside the top 250 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. This is a team that is playing pretty much even up with regards to turnover department as well. It's been an issue, and you do have nice size down low. Drew Fielder, he comes over from Georgetown, where last season he was star, gave that team 7 points, 5.5 boards per contest. You bring back Andrew Meadow, who at 6'7" last season had great versatility, shot in the mid-30s from 3, 12.5 points, 4 boards per contest. But for Wichita State, even though they lose Quincy Ballard from a season ago, they bring in the Berg, Will Berg, who at 7'2", comes in from Purdue, was lost in the shadow of Zach Edey, Trey Kaufman, Wren, and company, and he's been able to give this team some rough and tumble down low. The big issue Wichita State had last season was 3-point shooting. They were 339th in the country. They addressed that with bringing in Keenan Giles, who was averaging 15 points per contest over at UNC Greensboro, 40% 3-point shooting. He's right now shooting a very warm 63% from 3. He's not going to continue to shoot 63% from 3, but he's really elevated this team. They're now shooting over 42% from 3 as a collective. Again, is that going to be falling downward a little bit? Yes, but Karan Boyd, who was over at ETSU last season, was giving that team 5+ boards, a little bit of versatility. He's been able to do that for this team. They've got Jared Valencia, who's at 6'7", a guy that 2 years ago over at Monmouth shot over 40% from 3, back at the fold as well. And for this Wichita State team, they're doing a great job taking care of the ball. Fewer than 9 turnovers per game. They're generating over 14.5 on defense. This is a balanced team that finally has things rolling under Paul Mills. Set my line at 5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Wichita State, a team that's looking to play a little bit more up-tempo. Did set my total at 149. I think Boise State gets back to their defensive roots and a little bit more of a slower style, just a little bit. So in on the under and the points here with Wichita State. 645, 646 on the card. Gal Baptist is playing us at UC Riverside. Riverside is a 9.5 point dog. Total on this game between 140.5 to 141, and set Cal Baptist as a 10.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Dominique Daniels is certainly going to be the best player out there on the floor. He gave Cal Baptist last year 20.5 points per contest, and Cal Baptist's big issue last year was their three-point shooting. Last year, they were shooting right around about 275th in all of college basketball in terms of that three-point shooting percentage, and they brought back Martell Williams, who was really that top three-point shooter from a season ago. That's how you do it. He's given the team 8 to 9 points per contest, and he's been able to elevate off of that this year. 14.7 boards. Right now, shooting 46% from three. Don't think he's going to quite sustain that. And for Cal Baptist, still overall about 32% with regards to their three-point shooting, but I do like what Jaden Jackson is providing the backcourt. He comes on over from Northern Arizona, where last year, 12.5 points, mid-30s three-point shooter, 3.5 assists, 3.5 rebounds per game. He elevates his team, and this is a Cal Baptist team that I think is going to be a maul team down low, as you've got Brady Henje, who he's a true 7-footer. He's about 20 minutes per contest, and he's not going to give you explosive scoring or anything like that, but what you need him to do is grab boards, and he's been doing that, 7 rebounds per game. And Thomas Endong, who comes over from Oregon State, where last year didn't see a lot of minutes, he's been very rock solid, 10.5 boards, 7.5 points per game, and I do think that that's going to be tough for Riverside to be able to match up with. That's a big reason why I'm going to be willing to lay this number. I did set the Cal Baptist Lancers as a 10.5 point favorite. With Riverside, they had a double-figure lead against North Dakota on their home floor over the weekend with 5 minutes remaining and blew it, and this is just a very inexperienced team. They bring in Gus Arginal, who was a really good coach over at Cal State Bernardino, and he brought with him a few D2 guys, and then he brought in there some mix and match transfers like a Dylan Godfrey, who he was over at Canisius last year, supplying that team with 8.5 points, right around about 3 boards, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range, and then Osiris Gary, who comes over from Utah Valley, where he was a nice player for them last year as a starter, 5.5 points, not necessarily a demonstrative scorer, but a little bit more of a defense-oriented guy. But for this UC Riverside team, it's going to be interesting to see where they go with regards to this tempo, because when he was over at Cal State Bernardino, Arginal teams, they were always good at being able to generate turnovers, but that was part of the issue against North Dakota over the weekend. They did lose that turnover battle. They faced a Cal Baptist team that has been a little bit over the place in recent seasons with regards to their tempo. They look to be slowing it down this year to our 99th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Riverside a little bit more mid-tempo, about 233rd in the country, but that said, I do think that you get a little bit more scoring here, because with regards to this Cal Baptist team, they've done a nice job bringing in some three-point shooting. With Riverside, they really let go of the rope with regards to their defense over the weekend, and I set my total more around a 152.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on the over. On the Cal Baptist, I'm willing to lay the number. I did set them as a favorite of 10.5 points. 647, 648 on the card. It is Stanford. They play us at Louisiana. 19.5 to 20.5 point dogs. Totals between 137.5 to 138.5, and I made a total of 144. I like the over. Now, Louisiana, with the new coaching regime that has taken over, they have been playing at a rate outside the top 320 in terms of total possessions per game. So they're looking to play a little bit more slow and controlled under Keanis White. And with White, he did a nice job in bringing in some nice freshmen. Joshua Lewis was a top 100 freshman, has yet to really see the floor too much, because they've been looking a little bit more to the experienced guys like Jamarian Keller, who was over at Oklahoma State last season. I actually saw some good minutes for them. Jackson Oliveira comes over from Pepperdine. These two guys have really been your main guys. Oliveira last year was more of an ancillary guy for Pepperdine with about 6 points per contest, but has led the way this year, 16.5 points, 5.5 boards per contest. This is a Louisiana team that's going to be lacking something down low. Kyron Radcliffe has actually been with the program for quite a while. He was one of the main guys that was a holdover from a season ago. He stands right around about 6'8". He's been able to give the team about 4 boards per contest, but it's never really giving you too much offense. And with the Stanford team, they should be able to win that battle down low. Now with Stanford, I did set them as a 14-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take this place with Louisiana, because with this Stanford team, you also do lose Maximilian Radon from a season ago. Now, I will say, Abuka Okere has come in after he comes over from the state of New Hampshire, and he's right now averaging 25 points per game as a freshman. I do think we're going to see a little bit of a fall off there, but from there, it's a lot of ancillary guys from a season ago. Chisom Okpara, last year he gave you a rock solid 6.5 points per game, shot over 40% from 3 at 6'8". I remember when he was at Harvard a few seasons ago, really liked his game. He's been able to do a rock solid job. Benny Gieler has been able to ascend after being a bit of an ancillary guy last season in the backcourt. He's giving you about 13.5 points per contest, and I do think that Kyle Smith just knows basketball in general. His team has generated a grand total of now 57 turnovers in their first 3 games, but that said, they're also allowing a lot of open looks from 3. They're allowing opponents to shoot over 37% from 3. This year, they've been gambling a little bit more for turnovers outside the top 200 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, and Ryan Archibald, one of the main returners from a season ago, he's been dealing with injury, and when he's been out there, combined 4 points in the 2 games that he's played. So I do think that Louisiana Louisiana. Going to be able to find some open looks from three, take care of the ball. I'm in on the over, semi-total out of 144, and I think north of 14, I'm taking the Raging Cajuns. 649, 650 on the card. Nevada plays us at UC Davis. UC Davis, a double-figure underdog of 12 to 12.5 points. Open up at a 14. Total on scheme is 142.5, and I actually very much agreed with that 14 to 14.5. I had set Nevada as a 15.5 point favorite. I'm going to be one to lay it. For UC Davis, they always have one guy that they look to year in and year out to be the main dude, as I think they had that 2 years ago with Elijah Pepper. Last year, that was Ty Johnson. And it looks like Connor Sevilla is going to be taking over that role this year. They've also had a nice dose of Niles Cooper as well, but Cooper has been dealing with a little bit of injury to begin the season and was actually a former top 150 recruit. Pepperdine, he's been able to come in there, give you 16 points per contest when he's been out there on the floor. Looks like he should be good to go in this one, but I mean, that's a little bit of question mark with Sevilla. He's been able to do a nice job in terms of supplying 18.5 points per contest, was high 33-point shooter last season, and for Cooper and Sevilla, they're combining to shoot over 58% from three. That should take a fall off, and then Isaiah Chappell, their number 3, scored 12 points on 42% three-point shooting. Nobody else is doing much of anything from the outside for this team, as Carl Doherty has been dealing with a little bit of injury. You don't have much of anything down low. Nico Rokac has been with the program for quite a while, 6 rebounds per game. He's the only guy in the roster that's giving you about 4.3 rebounds per game, and Joel Armatrain should be able to win the battle down low. Comes on over from the UC Riverside, and last season gave the team about 6.5 to 7 rebounds per game. He's back there this season. And Elijah Price, who was over at Fresno State last season, he has been very rock solid on the boards. Last year, 10.5 points, 8 boards, 1.3 blocks per contest, and did not get caught up in the gambling scandal. And this year, he's up to a little bit over 10 rebounds per game. I do like the fact that Nevada brought in Tayshaun Comer as a nice go-to scorer over at Evansville. He's been leading the way with about 18 points per contest. Corey Camper also gives this defense a little bit more of an identity as well. He was really good at generating turnovers last year at UTEP. Has yet to really show with regards to this Nevada team, but Nevada's also done a really good job of taking care of the ball. Top 40 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis, and he's been able to supply this team with 15 points. It's a Nevada team that's leaving something to be desired with their three-point shooting at only about 30.5%, but he should do a nice job applying this UC Davis team down low. And for UC Davis, they're based around being able to generate turnovers. Last year, top 30 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, well outside the top 300 in terms of taking care of the ball. They are right back there this season, and with the way that this Nevada team is taking care of the ball, do think that they find a way to get the job done in. But I think it's going to be a relatively controlled game, but I do think that Nevada finds some open looks from three. Semi-total 143.5. I like the over, and I'm willing to lay it here with Nevada. 651, 652 on the card. Santa Clara plays us Idaho St. The Bengals are a 17 to 17.5 point underdog with a total of 145.5, and I'm going to take a shot here on Idaho State. I did set them as a 13-point underdog. Santa Clara always looks to play good, clean offense under Herb Sendek. They've been, over the last 3 years, in the top 70 every single year in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but now they turn over a new leaf in the backcourt. No more Adama Ball, some of these guys like Tyree Bryan that were good three-point shooters, and it's up to Elijah Mai along with Christian Hammond to really be leading things. Hammond has come in, and he has been absolutely tremendous after he was limited to only about 19 games 2 seasons ago, missed all of last year due to injury, and he's been able to give this team 17 points per contest. And then Mai, who was last year a guy that was averaging right around about 10 points per game, he's been able to elevate at 6'7", 15.5 points, 3.5 assists, and from three-point range, launching it at 38.5% from the outside. But I do think that this is a Santa Clara team that is going to be able to own the boards. As a matter of fact, Jake Amundsinger, last season, he grabbed more rebounds than he had points, about 8.5 points, 7.5 rebounds per game thus far this season. And then Bucky Oboye has been able to give you a little bit over 3 blocks per contest. I like what he's able to bring to the table, but for Idaho State, this was a team that last year was in the top 25 with regards to rebound percentage. I recognize that they did lose quite a few pieces from the season ago. Dylan Darling was a rock-solid point guard for them, but you did bring back one of your main big men in Evan Otten, and he's actually been relatively ineffective for the team. Last year gave them about 5.5 rebounds per game, down to about 3 boards per contest, but you still have a really good versatility with having 6'8" Caleb Van de Green coming over from the non-D1 ranks. He has been very solid with about 7 rebounds per game, and Colin Hellenbeck, he's one of the main guys that was able to return from the season ago. Last year, 9 points, 4 boards, 40% three-point shooter, now 16 points, 6.5 boards, just a do-it-all guy at 6'7", 7 that I think is going to be able to help this team hang in there. Lachlan Brewer, I thought, was a nice pickup as well. Comes over from Sacramento State, where he was a 6'6", a little bit of a do-it-all gadget guy for them last year that shot over 44% from 3. And I do think that ASA, who was outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game last year, might look to play a little bit more tempo. I think that their three-point shooting is a bit better, and they've been owning the boards once again. And I think that keeps them lively in a game where I think both teams are going to be grabbing a lot of second and third chances. I did set my line here at a 153 with regards to total, like the over, and with Idaho State, I'm going to be willing to take those points. 653, 664 on the card. San Diego State is playing us to Troy. The men of Troy are a pretty good-sized underdog here of 15.5 to 16 points total on this game, between 138.5 to 139.5, and with Troy, I made them an underdog of 13.5 points, so I'm going to be willing to take those points. Troy took it on the chin a few nights ago against CSUN. Cal State Northridge to give up over 90 points in that game, and for Troy, they're going to need to try to find that identity once again of generating turnovers. Last year, a top 40 team in terms of turnovers force on a per possession basis, and they've generated 17 turnovers per game this season, but much of that came in their non-Division I game against Pensacola Christian, where they won that game 121 to 56, so that very much skews the numbers. They do return their top rebounder from a season ago, and Thomas Dowd, 14 points, 9 rebounds as far this season, but really not a lot of other guys giving you rebounds. As for Troy, they were getting plastered on the defensive glass, but they did a great job giving themselves second and third chances with offensive rebounds a season ago, and after being outside the top 300 in terms of three-point shooting percentage last season, they're up to shooting about 37% this season. I do think that's going to be tapering off a little bit, so set a total of 137.5. I like the under, as San Diego State back to their old tricks. Right now, they have allowed a grand total of 102 points in their first 2 games of the season. It's a small sample size, and they were playing against Idaho State and Long Beach State, not necessarily the just monsters of the Midway with regards to their offense, but for this bunch, you do want to be taking note of some of the guys that are currently out of the fold. Latrell Davis along with Magoon Gwath. Gwath is that true 7-footer that is rock solid for them, and Davis, he was a really good scorer last year over at San Jose State. Sounds like these guys might be out for quite a bit, especially Gwath, so you need to check in there, but they do have Farrell Compton, who's been very rock solid last year. He was giving that team about 5.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game, but it's not necessarily much of a three-point shooter, and that's much of this roster. Miles Bird is going to be looked to as one of the main guys in the backcourt after last year. 12.5 points, 4.5 boards, 2.5 assists, 2 steals per contest, but again, not a guy that's really going to light you up from three-point range, so that's where the Davis injury really comes in, but they do get back Reese Waters, who missed all of last season due to injury. 2 years ago was a nice part of that team that was able to make that deep run in the NCAA tournament, so that's going to be able to elevate them a little bit. This team should be able to do a nice job in terms of being able to own the glass, but I think that Troy is going to be able to generate some turnovers. I do think that with San Diego State not having Gwath down low, that's going to hurt them a little bit on the glass. I think that this is going to be a relatively controlled game with a lot of dead possessions. So set a total of 137.5, like the under, and with San Diego State, I'm willing to take the points, set them as a 13.5 point underdog. 655, 656 is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we eat the extra games. Sacramento State is on the road against UCLA. UCLA is a pretty sizable favorite here of 27 to 27.5 points. Total open up at a 142.5. Now we're seeing between 142.5 to a 144.5, and I'm in on the over. I did set a total above a 150. I set my total at 152. I believe that Mike Bibby really wants his team to run, and the numbers are right now a little bit skewed because they play a game against a Blue Host of Presbyterian, who's like a bottom 10 team in the country right now in terms of total possessions per game. But I make no mistake about it. You bring in a guy like a Micah Williams, who he was a former top 75 recruit, spent last year over at Central Florida, where when he got minutes, he was a relatively good scorer for them. You've got Prophet Johnson, who he's hoping to be profitable for you as he comes over from Fairfield, where he was that top scorer for them last year with 13.5 points, 7.5 boards, 2.5 assists, 2 steals, did a little bit of everything aside from really light it up from three-point range. And then Jeremiah Cherry, he was at UNLV last year as a starter down low. He's been able to grab about 9 rebounds per game, and I think that that's going to be enough for this team to remain lively. I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on the points with Sacramento State. Now, Donovan Dent has been dealing with a little bit of injury, should be all good to go in this game, and last year over at New Mexico was one of the better guards in the country, 20.5 points, 6.5 assists per contest, shot relatively well from 3, but you can tell that there's a little bit of transition with them going to a guy in Dent who he played in a very up-tempo style in UCLA, back outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game, but you do have good versatility with the Daily Show and Eric Daly along Tyler Bilodeau, a pair of guys that have been averaging over 12 points per contest at 6'8" or taller. Both of these guys have shot in the high 30s from three-point range. For the Daily Show, you miss a game earlier in the season, but he returned in that game against Arizona, so should be good to go here. And even if he's not, you've got Steven Jamerson, Jefferson, who's able to give you a little bit of size. You bring in Jamar Brown, who is a versatile player over at UMKC. So I do think that for UCLA, they're in no danger of losing this game or anything like that, but I do think that Mike Bibby's style is going to push things a little bit more up and down. Semi-line at 24, taking the points with Sacramento State, and I like that over. Semi-total 152. Now we get the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-501, 306-502. American is on the road against Rutgers. Rutgers is a favorite of 16 to 16.5 points total on this game. It is 145.5, and with Rutgers, I set them as an 18.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. American last year was in the bottom 10 in terms of total possessions per game, and for that matter, pretty much each of the last 3 seasons, American has been well outside the top 315 in terms of total possessions per game. Right now, their numbers are a little bit warped because they played a game earlier in the season against a Penn team that is looking to play just up, down, all around, as American right now is 77th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. That'll be coming back downward, so I'm going to be in on this total under. I set my total at 144.5 and have a Rutgers team that is getting back to their roots. They're back in the top 50 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis after they just lost their identity last year with bringing in Dylan Harper, and you brought in Ace Bailey, a pair of guys that went in the top 5 in the NBA draft, and yet it didn't get this team an above 500 record. Now they go up against an American team that they do lose quite a few of those pieces from their NCAA tournament run from a season ago. Matt Mayock, a 6'7" combo player, is going to need to step up with having Mark Rogers out, who was 6'10" and was shooting it well from 3. Mayock has been able to give you about 6.5 points, 4 boards, and he does shoot it relatively okay from 3-point range. And for American, you do have to figure that this current 3-point shooting percentage of 27.5% does go northward. You got Greg Jones back last year, shot 43.5% from 3, 10.5 points per contest. He's right now shooting 17% from 3-point range. So again, I don't know if he duplicates what he does last season, but still pretty rock solid there. But this is a Rutgers team that they always make things very unpleasant on you. They returned a lot of the ancillary pieces from a season ago as well. You've got Dylan Grant back. You've got JaMychal Davis back, and Grant has been able to do a nice job giving the team 7 boards per contest. Emmanuel Ogobale, he comes over and he's been able to give the team right around about 8 boards per contest after he was a little bit more of an afterthought last season. Part-time starter, but lost in the shadow of those NBA draft picks. And Tariq Francis, who was very nice over at NJIT last year. Last year, 19 points, 4.5 boards, 3.5 assists, mid-30s 3-point shooter. He's been able to get this team double figures as well. I do think that Rutgers rediscovers that defensive identity. They find a way to get the job done against an American team. I think it's going to start to slow things down like they always do as well. Semi-line at 18.5, so we'll lay with Rutgers, and I'm in on the under. 306-503, 306-504. Vermont is on the road. They're playing against Buffalo. Let's go Buffalo as a 2.5 point underdog total on this game between 141.5 to a 142.5, and I did set Vermont as a 3.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on the Catamounts. Now for Buffalo, they've been quite a bit more respectable this season, but for Vermont, they had some struggles in their exhibition matches against a non-D1 foe, and I mean, they had a tough time in their first game of the season against Western New England, 75-68, but now you've got TJ Long back. He was limited only about 8 or so games last season. He's been supplying the team with 22 points per game, and the offensive firepower, it is back with this Vermont team, and so is that slow, controlled style. They're back outside the top 275 in terms of possessions per 40 minutes. I say that because they played a double overtime game against Brown. Obviously, you're going to have more possessions than a 50-minute game rather than a 40-minute game, but they've had Gus Yeldon also enter in the fray as well. This is a former top 200 recruit of Wisconsin at Seton Hall. He's been a little bit banged up to begin the season, but they got him back out there in that game against Northeastern. That should really elevate them down low. A 6'9" big man that should be able to give them the rebounding that they really did not have a season ago. You also bring back Noah Barnett, who's been a nice little bit of a do-it-all player, 8.5 points, 4.5 boards, so he's not necessarily going to shoot it well from 3-point range. And for Buffalo, last season they were inefficient in pretty much every way possible with Ty Dunn running the show, and now they've given the keys to the car to Daniel Freitag, who he was over at Wisconsin, could not see any minutes for them, but a high upside guy in the backcourt that has been pairing well with Noah Batchelor, a guy that actually began his career over at Maryland and has found a home here at Buffalo. He's been able to give you about 7 points, 6 boards. He did so last season, and he's duplicating those numbers this season. And dude like Angelo Breezy, who he was a few seasons ago over at Davidson, along with Longwood, shooting about 40% for 3. Ryan Sable's able to give you 16 points per game, but the team really doesn't have a lot of depth. Once you get outside that starting 5, there's just not a lot there. Vermont has a little bit more, and with Vermont, they have an uncanny ability to be able to slow things down. And Buffalo has really slowed themselves down as well. It's a small sample size, but currently 351st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Tim Boba has been able to give you something down low, but Gus Yeldon coming back in the fold for Vermont, I think allows them to be able to win the battle down low and get the job done here. I did sub my line at 3.5 43.5. I'm going to be willing to lay it with Vermont. I do think that this game is close enough for late game felling, and I do think that Buffalo is much improved on offense, and TJ Long really elevates Vermont with regards to their scoring as well, so made a total of 143.5. I do like the over. 36.505, 36.506. Boston U is on the road against Columbia. Columbia, a 6.5 point favorite. Total on this game, it is 147.5. I did set a total here of a 146, so I'm going to be in on the under, and I made Boston U the 2-point underdog, so I'm going to be willing to take the points here with Boston U. Boston U always does a good job of being able to hit the glass and being able to play tough, tenacious defense. The offense always leaves quite a bit of something to be desired. They have been one of the worst free throw shooting teams in all of college basketball over the last few seasons, but there's reason to believe that they might be a little bit better on offense this year with Mr. Michael Air McNair. Last year shot 40% from 3, gave the team 12 points per contest. He's building off that to give them 16 points per game. Sam Hughes in the backcourt has been a really nice find as well. Through the first 4 games, he's been able to give the team a combined 64 points. Right now shooting 53% from 3, and that's going to be suffering a little bit of fall off, but I like what this team has down low. Quinn Neeson is not necessarily going to give you a ton with regards to scoring. He comes on over from the Citadel, but he does add a nice little element of a 6'11" body. He pairs up very well with the guys who returned from last year. Malcolm Chamazi, who was able to give you about 5 or so rebounds per game. Ben Defty, he was, as a 7-footer last year, able to see some solid minutes. He's actually been a little bit more of an offensive guy with a career about 6.3 rebounds per contest, and you're right now dealing with the injury with Otto Landrum, but that said, I do think that this backcourt continues to ascend, and when it comes to this Columbia team, they had a coaching change in the offseason as it was a Florida assistant and Kevin Avdi that took over the program, and he got them to a nice win over New Haven night number 1. They then get blasted by UConn, and everyone's going to get blasted, but I believe they got the cover there, and then they blow out UMass Lowell. So they played one really, really good team and 2 of the lesser teams in all of college basketball. So hard to get too much of a feel for this team. They're right now really driving the ball down low. They've been attempting about 65 or so % of their shots from 2-point range, even though they've got capable 3-point shooters. Kenny Nolan last year was their number 2 scorer behind Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa. He shot 37% from 3, 12.5 points per contest, career 38% 3-point shooter. Avery Brown is a guy that's been around the program a little bit. He last season was a starter with about 11 points per game. Now, he's not necessarily a good 3-point shooter, career less than 30% 3-point shooter, but you know what, he's pretty rock solid, and he did have a little bit of an injury that caused him to be out for their previous game, so that's something that you do want to be mindful of, and I've attributed that as well. And Blair Thompson, I think, is going to be a little bit better than how he started the season. Last year, about 9 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. So he's been a career 34% 3-point shooter at 6'8", has averages 4.3 points per game here in the first few games. But I do think that Boston U remains competitive. They do a nice job down low. They're typically outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game. Seems as though Columbia is going to be a little bit more up-tempo, but I don't think that it's going to be anything ridiculous. So I did set a total here of a 146 at the 147 plus. I do like the points here with Boston U to go along with an under. 306-507, 306-508. You've got North Carolina A&T on the road against Morgan State. Morgan State, a home underdog of 1 point to a 1.5. Total on this game, it is 158.5 to a 159. And I did set North Carolina A&T as a underdog here of 2.5 points. I do like Morgan State outright on the money line as the home underdog. For Morgan State, they did a nice job in terms of retaining quite a few guys from last season. And for Morgan State, over the tutelage of Kevin Broadus as a coach, typically they've been a little bit rough down low, but they bring back the 7-footer Christian Oliver from a season ago. He pairs really good with Marlon Harris, who he was limited due to injury last season. Both of these guys have done a pretty rock solid job, combining for about 9 or so rebounds per game. And you've got a veteran backcourt. Alfred Worrell was able to see some nice minutes to put in their 8 points per contest over at Southern Miss last season. Rob Lawson is someone that a season ago, he gave the team some facilitation with 2.5 assists, 7.5 points per game, was able to ascend to shoot about 37.5% from 3-point range as well. And then you've got a nice upside guy in Dallas James, who comes over from South Carolina State to be able to add some further size as well. And I think that North Carolina A&T is going to have a little bit of a tough time with that, as North Carolina A&T really had to turn over a new leaf towards the end of the season last year. They were playing quite up-tempo, and then they decided that they were going to suspend pretty much 3 of their top 4 scorers in the likes of Landon Glassberg and company, so they really had to remake their team. So a lot of guys that were ancillary pieces actually got some minutes towards the back half of the season, but they're looking to Luron Walker, who comes up from the non-D1 ranks, to really just run everything. 69 points through the first 3 games of the season for him. They bring in Trent Middleton. He was a pretty solid piece over at Delaware last year, 5.5 points. Career about 35% 3-point shooter, was not great from 3 last season, so we'll see what he's able to do this season. But they do suffer a little bit with regards to losing some of that size down low. Some like a KJ Dembrick, who comes over from Cleveland State, is going to need to be one of your main guys at 6'9". 2 seasons ago, was able to give that team 4.5 points, 4.5 boards per contest, fell out of favor with them last season. But that said, with regards to North Carolina A&T, this is not a team that necessarily has great three-point shooting at 27.5% from the outside. They've been having a tough time on the boards themselves. They're doing a great job getting to the free throw line. They're actually a top 5 team in terms of free throw attempts per game, but they're shooting 64% at the free throw line, and Morgan State is a team that's looking to play a little bit more physical. I think that those missed free throws could cause you a total. Here I set mine at a 158.5, so 159 plus. I do like the under despite Morgan State typically being a top 50 team in terms of total possessions per game, and I like Morgan State outright on the money line. 3-6-5-09, 3-6-5-10. IU Indy is on the road against Charleston Southern. Charleston Southern is a 2.5 to 3-point home underdog with a total of 191 to 191.5, and guess what I set my total at? 193.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on the over. With IU Indy, it's just a harebrained, insane style. This is a style that last year, if you follow the West Liberty team at the Division II ranks, that's where Ben Howlett was coaching previously, they average 100.9 points per game. And right now, IU Indy, through 5 games, that includes a game against Ohio State, that includes a game against Butler, they're averaging 96.6 points per game. That does include a non-D1 team as well, but it's clearly a team that's looking and gunning, and it is an IU Indy team that leaves something to be desired with their three-point shooting at 31.2%, but this is a team that is very much based around generating turnovers. They are generating over 21 turnovers per game. They full court pressure you. They're going to lose a battle down low, but they don't care as long as they're able to generate those turnovers, and you've got Kyler D'Agostino along with Matt Compass, who will be able to combine for about 30 points per contest between the two of them, but it's really a whole is greater than the sum of its parts approach, because when you play that sort of a pressure style, you need to just have like hockey style line changes, and that's why you've got 9 different guys averaging at least 12 minutes per game for this unit. And on the other end, you've got a squad in Charleston Southern that they are a team that has a little bit of a tough time being able to go into their bench. I think that this could be a little bit exhausting for them. They might have the best player out there on the floor in Alan Sumler, who 2 seasons ago was averaging about 13 points per contest before getting hurt last season, and they're clearly going to be able to win the battle down low. Nate Bradford, he comes over after at Manhattan last season. He was giving that team like 3 to 4 boards. He was able to give you a block per contest. Actually, that's his brother, as Nate Bradford comes on over from Georgia State, and you've got the other Bradford and Devin Bradford, who he comes on over from Siena. Now, Devin has been dealing with a little bit of an injury. Nate, he's been out there on the floor giving the team right around about 5 rebounds per game, and then Reese Jones, who was last year with the team giving you about 5.5 rebounds per game, he's ascended to giving you 6 boards per game. But for Charleston Southern, they're shooting about 35.5% from 3. They've guarded the 3-point arc well, but they allow a lot of penetration inside, especially with dealing with that injury to Devin Bradford. And you've got Bryson Blaine, who comes on up from the non-D1 ranks, originally began his career over at James Madison before he stepped down a level, and he's come in and he's given the team 24 points, 8 rebounds per game as a 6'8", little bit of a do-it-all player. But I do think that this IU Indy squad is going to take it out of a Charleston Southern team that year in and year out, they've always had a tough time in terms of winning the turnover battle. Right now, they're outside the top 3 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They're turning the ball over themselves 13.5 times per game, and it is going to be a little bit of an issue for them. But I also do think that with this IU Indy style, they're going to get absolutely blasted on the glass. I think that Sumler is going to be able to step up, and this just style in general that IU Indy plays should allow a Charleston Southern team that's shooting 35.5% from 3 to get some good looks from 3. I think it's going to be up, down, all around, and I do think that in the end, Charleston Southern does find a way to persevere, get the job done on their home floor, as I did set them as a 5.5 point favorite. This opened up as more of a pick 'em line, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot on Charleston on the money line, and actually they opened up, Charleston Southern did, as a 1.5 point favorite, so we're seeing a flip of favorites here. Give me Charleston Southern on the money line and this total over, as I do think this is going to be close enough for some late game filling. 3-6-5-11, 3-6-5-12. Radford is going to be on the road against South Carolina. South Kakalaki is a 10.5 point favorite. Total on this game, it is 155.5. With Radford, I set them as a 12 point dog. I'm going to be willing to lay with South Carolina. South Carolina has typically been outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game under Lamont Parrish, and it's very clear that this Radford team is looking to push tempo. You're finding that with pretty much all these guys that come up from the NBA ranks. Zach Chu, he was a little bit of a game manager over at the Indiana Pacers a season ago, and he's got Dell Jones along with Dennis Parker doing a nice job in terms of being able to lead this offense. They combined 32 points per game out of these two guys, and they're both guys that come in from the ACC, as you've got Parker, who comes on over from NC State, where he actually saw some solid minutes during the 2023-24 campaign. He was giving that team about 4.5 points, 3.5 boards, has never been an amazing 3-point shooter, but at 6'6", good versatility there, and Del Jones is a little bit more of a facilitator that comes on over from Clemson, and he pairs well with Jalen Johnson, who he was at Tennessee Tech a season ago, where he did a nice job giving that team 14 points, 5 assists, mid-33-point shooter. But that said, with regards to this Radford team, they've also got a guy in Tyson Brown who does a nice job in terms of being able to hit the boards. Last year in the Sun Belt, was able to give that team about 6 or 7 rebounds per game, but South Carolina should be able to win that battle down low, because I like what you're getting in the true 7-footer in Jordan Butler. He's a guy that comes on over after he was a top 100 recruit, has been a little bit up, down all around throughout his career, began his career over at Missouri, couldn't really find his footing there. He saw starts, but he was pretty much a guy that won the tip ball, and then he would go to the bench. But you've also had Michi Johnson come back and do a nice job with regards to giving the team a nice scoring punch. He was over at Ohio State last year, and it's very interesting. He started at Ohio State, went to South Carolina, went to Ohio State again, and now he's back at South Carolina. And last we saw him at South Carolina was averaging 14 points per game and was leading this team to the NCAA tournament. He pairs well with Eli Ellis, a top 1 recruit who's been able to supply 13.5 points per game, and then just the versatility of this team I think matches up well with Radford. Miles Tute at 6'7" is able to bomb it from 3. Mongolian Mike began his career over at Dayton. He's on school number 4 in 4 years. He has been able to do a really nice job in terms of giving you a pair of assists per contest throughout his career. Has always been a solid rebounder. Last year over at Utah was a starter that put in there 7 points per game. Career about 33% 3-point shooter as a 6'9", relatively do-it-all sort of player. And then Nordin Kopic, hopefully I said that correct, who comes over from UC San Diego. He was a big part of that team last year in terms of giving the team a steal, 10.5 points, 5 boards per contest. He lends more versatility as well. So I do think that South Carolina can match that versatility of Radford. I think that South Carolina gets this game played a little bit more on their terms, and that allows them to cover this summer. I set my line at 12. I'm going to be willing to lay it with South Carolina, and I'm in on the under 3-6-5-13, 3-6-5-14. Lehigh is going to be playing us to St. Francis, Pennsylvania. St. Francis is a 9.5-point underdog. Total is between 154 to a 154.5. Did set my total here at 152.5. I like the under. Lehigh looks to play a little bit more up-tempo than most Patriot League teams, but Lehigh was also outside the top 340 in terms of offensive rebound percentage last season. And for St. Francis, it's very clear that they're going to be looking to play a little bit more tempo this season, as they underwent a coaching change in the offseason after making the NCAA tournament. It was a case where Rob Krimmel just decided to call it quits because St. Francis is going to be at the Division III level next year, but for Luke McConnell, he's come in and he's brought in a guy like a Cameron Tweedy, who is part of that Fairleigh Dickinson team that won in the NCAA tournament over Purdue a few seasons ago. He's been able to give you 8 points per game, and I like the game of Zion Russell. He was over at Niagara 8 seasons ago where he supplied that team with about 7 points, pair of assists, mid-33-point shooter, but I mean, you've got a team that is looking to play up-tempo, but they really don't have a lot of outside forces. They're only shooting about 31% from 3 points. I love Sky Wicks down low. Sky Wicks, when he was over at Incarnate 2 seasons ago before getting hurt at UTSA last year, he was giving that team like 6+ rebounds, 14+ points. He's able to play an up-tempo brand of basketball, and you're going to need to have someone like an Ahmad Harrison, who he's in from Fordham from 8 seasons ago, to be able to give you a little bit more of something. Harrison was at the non-Division I ranks as well, but I said, when it comes to this Lehigh team, I do think that the fact that they had so many injuries last season actually helps them out for this season, because now you've had a little bit more time with Nasir Whitlock as that go-to scorer. He and Joshua Ingram are the main holdovers in the backcourt. They're combining for 25 points, nearly 10 rebounds per game. It's a Lehigh team that they're very content to be bombing it from 3. They're only shooting about 32.5% from the outside. After that was a bit higher last season, but I do think that Nate Galvey, who last year gave you 5+ rebounds per game, he does a solid job down low against Sky Wicks. And additionally, you've got a little bit more of a just rim protector and a guy that's going to be able to play some tough, tenacious defense down low. And Henry Adiasa, he's been a little bit banged up to begin the season, but should be good to go here. I do think that with Lehigh, a team that has been able to do a relatively solid job limiting teams from 3, they're shooting less than 30% against them. That is going to be able to help them out in a game where I think that St. Francis is going to be matched down low by Alvey and company. And I do think that both of these teams can have some dead possessions, as you've had Lehigh turn the ball over about 13.5 times per contest. St. Francis, they're turning the ball over about 14 times per game. So I'm in on the under, so my total 152.5. And with Lehigh, I could only make them a 6.5 point favorite. I think that Wicks is able to keep St. Francis lively in this game. So taking the points, and I'm going to be in on the under. 306-515, 306-516. Brown, what can Brown do for you? Well, they win this game by a few points against Holy Cross. They'll make you some money. Brown is a 3.5 to a 4.5 point favorite. Total is 140.5, and I only made this line 1.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Holy Cross. And the main reason reason why is that Brown is dealing with all sorts of injuries right now. Landon Lewis, top returning scorer with 13.5 points, 6 boards per contest. He has not hit the floor yet this season, and we have no idea when he and Alexander Lesbert, a guy that was averaging about 10.5 points per game last season, are going to be back for this team. And that's a big issue because now you're looking to Jeremiah Jenkins, who was not seeing a lot of playing time whatsoever last year, to really be taking hold of this team. They still have a little bit of size down low. Charlie O'Sullivan, as a true freshman, he comes in from the great state of Connecticut. He's able to give you a bit of something down low. And Nafara Dabo last season was a okay rebounder for the team, 4.5 boards, nearly 2 blocks per contest, saw about 17.5 minutes per game. So you still have a little bit in terms of rim protection, but that offensive punch that you were going to get from those two guys, that has not been there for Brown. They're averaging 67.5 points per game, despite the fact that they played a double overtime game against Vermont. Other than that game against Vermont that went to double overtime, they just have not been able to put points upon the board to save their lives. And I do think that on the flip side, you're going to be able to get a solid effort from a Holy Cross team that last year was in the top 12 in all of college basketball in terms of three-point shooting percentage. They do lose some of the guys like Max Green and company, but you bring back Joe Nugent, 40% three-point shooter, who at 6'6" is right now supplying the team with 14 points per game. Now, with that great three-point shooting, Holy Cross was also 364th out of 364 Division I teams in terms of free throws attempted per possession last year, but Tyler Boston, one of my favorite stats ever, he in 10 games last season, so small sample size, averaged 9 points per game on 81.8% three-point shooting. That has cooled down to a hearty 37.5% this season, but as you can tell, very good score. He's been able to give the team 15 points per game. Gabe Warren, DeAndre Williams are nice pieces in the backcourt. You really don't have a lot of rim protection with this team. They've got a guy in Chuck Hare who is standing 6'10", but he hasn't seen a lot of minutes. But that said, I do think that for Holy Cross, they're able to do a nice job of hanging in there with Brown. And for Holy Cross, even though they're a relatively slow team, last year outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game, they're also outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That should be able to get a Brown team that's had a really, really rough time of it get going. And right now, Brown is 364th out of 364 teams in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage. So I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the over. Semi total 145.5. Semi line of 1/2. Taking the points with Holy Cross. 36-5-17, 36-5-18. Jacksonville plays on the road against George Mason. George Mason is a favorite of 13 to 14.5 points. Dawn's game, it is 135.5. And I did set a total here of a 141. I do like the over. With George Mason, this team last year was a top 10 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They're back in the top 20 this season, but you've got a Jacksonville team that's in quite a bit of transition because they did lose their do-it-all guy from a season ago, and Robert McRae, who's right now tearing it up over at Florida State. But that said, for this Jacksonville team, you do have quite a bit of solid guard play. You've got Chris Arias along Jalen Jones, who have been able to combine for about 27 points per contest. Jones last season, he was over at Oakland, where he just didn't find a great role for a team that just really struggled from three-point range. 2 seasons ago at Tennessee State, he was giving that team 9 points, 4 boards, a steal, 3 assists, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. So I do think that he's going to be a little bit more unlocked here, but for Jacksonville, when these teams have been really successful under Jordan Mincy, typically involves really good rebounding, and you just don't have that. You've got a guy in Donovan Rivers who's been able to give you about 5 rebounds per game. He's been in the program for the last few seasons, but they lose a lot of that good forward play from a season ago, and George Mason should be able to just eat them alive down low. Riley Allenpatch, who comes over from Stanford, where he actually shot it very well from 3 at 6'11". He's right now giving the team 11.6 rebounds per game. Corey Mincy, he's a really good guard from Presbyterian, who's right now giving you 5 boards per contest. With the Blue Oaks last season, 15 points, 4.5 assists, shot about 37% from three-point range. And with George Mason, they actually did do a nice job in terms of being able to add in there some three-point shooting, and that pairs very well with Nick Ellington, Dola Adebayo, 2 really good rebounders. Ellington coming in from Murray State. Adebayo, he was a 6+ rebound per game guy over at Mount St. Mary's. So you've got a pair of guys that do a solid job there. Masai Troutman is right now dealing with injury along Braden O'Connor, so backcourt has left a little bit of something to be desired, but still, George Mason is right now averaging 78+ points per game because they're doing a nice job in terms of turning defense into offense. They're generating about 14 turnovers per game. They themselves have been a little bit sloppy with the ball, but they're right now owning the glass, and I think that they'll do so against this Jacksonville team. I did set my line at 19 with a Jacksonville team that has had a very, very difficult time taking care of the ball because when they lost their main guy from a season ago, they had nobody to take over the point guard role, and they're right now turning the ball over 14 times per game. So I do like the over, so I total 141, and one way George Mason set them as a 19-point favorite. 36-5-19, 36-5-20. NJIT is on the road against Drexel, and the Dragons of Drexel are a pretty good size favorite here of 9.5 to 10 points. Total on this game is 133.5 to 134, and I'm going to be won't take those points with NJIT. Set them as a 7.5 point underdog. This NJIT team has been very feisty. We saw them in their first game of the season go on the road, knock off Fordham, and they returned quite a few guys from a season ago. Now, we have not seen a ton of Sebastian Robinson. He began the season deal with a little bit of an injury, and it's going to be very unclear as to when he's going to be able to hit the floor, as we have not seen him really since that first game of the season. But that said, you've got Ari Fulton back. He last season was a nice, shall we say, ancillary starter for them. 7 points, 5 boards per contest at right around about 6 foot 7. Not a guy that's going to give you versatility or anything like that, but he does a good job defending down low. And in the absence of Sebastian Robinson, David Bolden, a true freshman, has really taken leadership. 4 assists, 4 boards, 15 points per game for an NJIT team that has been shooting about 36% from 3. The NJIT was actually one of the best perimeter defenses in all of college basketball last season, even with losing Tariq Francis to Rutgers. They've been allowing teams to shoot less than 30% from 3-point, so they've been rock solid there. Now they're getting absolutely dump trucked on the glass. That's going to be a little bit of an issue for moving forward, but that said, with Drexel, this is a offense that we saw them get up 31-30 in their game over the weekend against Syracuse, and then get outscored the rest of the game for about 23 minutes by a count of 50-19, and they lost 4 of their top 5 scores from a season ago. You do bring back Shane Blakeney, who's giving you 12.5 points per contest, and also getting 12.5 points per game out of Eli Beard. He comes on up from the non-D1 ranks, but at 3-point shooting of Kobe McGee and company, that is gone for Drexel, and with this Drexel team, they're doing a great job on the glass. They're one of the best rebound teams in all of college basketball, but they're also shooting 57% on the free throw line, and with regards to their defense, they're doing a great job on the inside, but they're allowing opponents to shoot over 35% from 3-point range as well. I think that that's going to be playing into the hands of NJIT in terms of being able to cover this game, as you've got Kevon Vandernoorst, who's been able to give you about 10.5 points, 5 rebounds per game, and Victor Panov, who's been with the program for the last few seasons. Last year gave the team 6.5 points, 4 boards per contest, tries to shoot it from 3, doesn't necessarily shoot it well. He's able to give you 5 boards as well. So with NJIT, they've got a nice advantage in the backcourt. For Drexel, they've got an advantage down low. I think that NJIT holds in there in a little bit of a slog of a game. Now, I did sell my total 135.5. I think that this is going to be close enough for late game felling, and I do think that for Drexel, they do a nice job on the inside in terms of getting those 2-point buckets. So in on the over and the points with NJIT, 36-5-21, 36-5-22. Maryland Eastern Shore is on the road against Longwood. This is a total at open up at 150, and this is getting pile driven downward to a 143.5, and your side is Longwood being a 16.5 point favorite. And with regards to this total, I still think that you got plenty of room on the under. I set my total at a 137.5. How they opened this up at a 150, I have no idea. Like, Maryland Eastern Shore is averaging 12.9 points fewer per 100 possessions than the next least efficient offense in all of college basketball. They played an overtime game against Georgia Tech where neither team got to 60. Now, what that means is that the Maryland Eastern Shore defense isn't quite as sorry as it has been in the past. Now, that Georgia Tech game was a triumph for them, and then in their game against Georgia, they give up 90-plus points there, so that was a little bit of an issue, but and that's that for Maryland Eastern Shore. With losing Casey Shaw from a season ago, he actually came on over with Cleo Hill. They were both at Winston-Salem 2 years ago. His team has had absolutely no response whatsoever with regards to backcourt. Like, you're looking for a point guard, you're looking for a main scoring guard. You don't have a single guy in the roster that's averaging more than 9 points per game. Joseph Lusardo is right now averaging 8.8 points per game. Nobody else is above 6.4 points per game. Like, Christopher Flippin, who's back from a season ago, he was flipping good with giving you about 5 rebounds per game. He has struggled. You've got Justin Mondin, who's kind of gone from the non-D1 ranks. He's averaging 6 points per game. Like, you just have a mismatch of different guys that are just not putting the biscuit in the basket. Trey Hall, who's played college basketball quite literally for about 57 years, he comes on over after he was limited due to injury last year. Actually had a nice go of it over at Evansville many, many years ago, but I mean, man, you just don't have a lot there. And with Longwood, I did have to set them here as a favorite of only about 15.5 points because they themselves, very pedestrian, 171st in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, relatively mid-tempo team. You've got a guy in Jacoy Hutchinson, who I really liked. He was over at George Washington last year, 7 points, pair of assists per contest, honestly, an amazing 3-point shooter, and right now with Longwood, they're shooting 23.8% from 3. That should be going northward a little bit, but I just don't see why you're getting such a high total here. Alonzo Billups, he's a guy with a little bit of upside, comes in from VCU where he saw some solid minutes, career mid-30s three-point shooter. Elijah Tucker, he continues to do some rock-solid work down low last year for this team, 9.5 points, 5 rebounds per game, but I do think that Maryland Eastern Shore does enough on defense to hold in there in a game that I think is going to be a slog. Semi-total at a 137.5, like the under with the Shore at 16 plus, I'm going to be willing to take those points. 306-523, 306-524. North Carolina plays us at Navy. Navy is an underdog of 23.5 to 24.5 points. So on this game, it is 160.5 to 161.5. Give me the midshipmen here, as I did set Navy as a underdog of 22.5 points for Navy. They returned the most minutes of any team in all of college basketball from a season ago, and they did have a coaching change, but that said, they kept everything in-house, so the system has remained relatively the same for a Navy team that they did have a rough go of it on defense against Yale, but ever since then, they've been able to restore some order, had a nice triumph over Washington College. That's not necessarily saying too much, but that said, in their games not involving Navy, along with a very up-tempo Penn State team, they've been able to hold up relatively well defensively. You got Aiden KOA, who I think can actually match up relatively okay down low. He and Don Draper are right now combining for about 15 rebounds per game. KOA at 6'10", 230. He's got some relatively good strength. Awesome Benjini last year was your top scorer with about 16 points per contest, but it's actually been Jinwoo Kim who's been able to lead the way with regards to this team, as last year he shot 40% from three. This year he's supplying the team with about 15 points per contest. Navy, when they're really at full force, they do a nice job in terms of generating turnovers, and typically outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game. With North Carolina, certainly you've got a lot of main attractions with this team, as Caleb Wilson at 6'10" is showing really good versatility. Not going to light you up from three-point range or anything like that, but 20 points, 9.5 boards. He has been really nice to begin the season. Henry Vassar is a true 7-footer. That gives this team really nice versatility. We saw what he was able to do over at Arizona last season, but they're dealing with the injury to Seth Trimble. That hurts a backcourt that has been really reliant upon Kaya and Anderson to run the show, as he was a nice player over at Colorado State last season, but they were able to take a little bit off his plate, and now you've got he and Luka Bravich who are needing to lead things, and now they have to go up against a very, very veteran team in Navy. Now, I do like the low post play as well. Jaron Stevenson, Jonathan Boom Boom Powell, these are guys that come from the Power Conference level. With Powell, he was pretty solid over at West Virginia last season, and Stevenson, he was a guy that over at Alabama never got a massive role, but would always give you a few rebounds, had a bit of versatility to be able to shoot it from three. But that said, I think the Navy holds in there. I think that this is going to be a little bit of a slower game than anticipated as well, and I do think that with North Carolina having Trimble out of the fold, they're going to need to embrace their low post play a little bit more as well. So I did set a line here of a 154.5. I like the under at 23 plus 1. Take the points with Navy. 306-525, 306-526. Eastern Kentucky's on the road against Kent State. Kent State is a pretty good size favorite here. You're going to be finding them as a 9 to 9.5 point favorite total on this game. It is 159.5. Set a line of a 167.5 with regards to the total. I like the over. You've got an Eastern Kentucky team that's outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and Eastern Kentucky always gambles for turnovers. They're always a top 50 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but when they don't get those turnovers, they allow wide open looks from three-point range. Last year, we're about 280th in the country in terms of three-point shooting percentage, and they bring back Montavis Merrick from a season ago. He was able to do a nice job giving the team about 7 points, 8 rebounds per game, and they've been looking to have a nice low post presence over the last few seasons, ever since Isaiah Kozart was in there leading the country in terms of blocks. Turner Buttrey has been in the program for quite a while. He's giving you 10 points per game. And Juan Cranford last season over at St. Francis of Pennsylvania was a good three-point shooter that averaged double figures out there in the NEC, but right now with this bunch, they are having a very difficult time in terms of being able to just defend down low. They're outside the top 320 in terms of opponent's two-point shooting percentage, and again, that three-point shooting defense is always lackadaisical against a Kent State team that last year they were just 313th in terms of three-point shooting percentage. This is clearly a different team. Right now they're shooting 37.5% from three-point range, with Morgan Stafford really leading the way. He was limited to just 8 games a season ago. That's a big reason why they were so lackluster with regards to their three-point shooting. Right now, 17 points per game on 45% three-point shooting. Now more of a career 34% three-point shooter, but for Eastern Kentucky, I mentioned the fact that they have been not doing a great job of defending down low. You've got Rocco Gillespie, who was averaging a double-double in MAC play towards back half of the season last year. He's expanded upon that. 21 points, 13.5 rebounds thus far this season. And Sion Medley, not necessarily the biggest scorer in the world, a career about 6 to 7 point per game guy. He's been able to ascend with that scoring a little bit, but He's only got 5.8 assists per game. He generates some turnovers going all the way back to his time at St. Louis, and I believe that he's doing a good job of just helping this Kent State team ascend after last year. They were well outside the top 100 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. It's always been a Kent State team that they themselves have been pretty solid in terms of generating turnovers, leading to some fast break buckets. Right now, they're only averaging about 12.5 turnovers per game, so they've looked to turn over a new leaf. They're playing a bit more up-tempo, and I do think that allows them to get the job done here against Eastern Kentucky on the money line, though. I do think that Eastern Kentucky does generate some turnovers. Kent State, they're averaging about 13 turnovers per game. I think that this is going to be a wild up and down game, and Kent State, they themselves are allowing opponents to shoot over 38% for three, so set my line at 7.5. I'm going to take 9+ here with Eastern Kentucky, and I'm in on the over. 306-527, 306-528. New Hampshire is on the road against Providence. Providence is a very sizable favorite here. You're going to be laying with them between 27 to 27.5 points. So this game, it is 163.5 to 164.5, and I made a total of 154. I'm going to be in on the under with this New Hampshire squad. It is one that got very, very hot to begin their game against Harvard, but you've got a lot of moving pieces. It does feel like Nate Davis is actually doing a solid job with the team after Murphy's Law at them last season. They had just so many different injuries. You've got Bilal El-Shakiri, who's been able to give you 12 points per game, and Keyshawn Robinson, who began his career over at Hofstra. He's right now your main man. He's been able to give the team about 13.5 points per contest. Career 34% three-point shooter. Has dealt with a little bit of injury. He's already missed a game thus far this season. He was missing for their previous game, and it's very TBD as to what you're going to be able to get out of him. I did have to downgrade them a little bit because even if he plays in this game, might not be 100% as a result. Made my line a 28, but you've got John Squire, who he began his career over at Pepperdine, and he was just dealing with a little bit of injury, went down to the 91 ranks last season, and he's been able to give this team a little bit of something down low with about 5.5 rebounds per game. But Oswin, I'm not even going to try to say his last name for Providence, should be the big dominator here. He's been generating 3+ turnovers per game. Now, the Providence defense has really fallen off from its season ago. They're well outside the top 125 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. While they've been pretty sound on the interior, they're allowing opponents to shoot 38.5% from 3 points. I do think that they get back to their defensive roots. It's a offense that has been very good under Jason Edwards, Jalen Sellers. Right now, these two guys are combined for a little bit over 35 points per contest. With Sellers, he was a very good 3-point shooter over at both Ball State, and in Central Florida it was a little bit more sketchy, but that said, he's been able to find a good home here. And then Jason Edwards was a 17-point per game scorer over at Vanderbilt. He has been able to certainly duplicate that here for Providence. You've also got Ryan Malaya, who's been able to do a nice job giving you a little bit of this and that. Last year he was a guy that supplied about 6.5 points, 5 boards, was able to shoot about 30% from 3 at 6'6". I do think that Providence takes it to a New Hampshire team that right now there's a little bit of question mark with their main guy in Robinson, and I do think that Providence is going to be able to find that defensive form just a little bit more. So just on my total 154, I'm in on the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 27.5 here with Providence. 306-529, 306-530. New Haven is on the road against Seton Hall. Seton Hall is a 23.5 point favorite. The total opened up at a 130. We are now down to a 126.5, and I actually set a total of 137.5. I'm in on the over now. The fear that you've got is that New Haven just does not do their part with this total. New Haven, well outside the top 3 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. This was a sub-500 team at the Division II ranks. They lost 5 out of their top 7 scorers from that season, and they did not bring in any Division I players via the transfer portal. So that's not great, but you've got Jacoby Fitzpatrick along with Jamie George, who in the backcourt have been able to combine for about 27 points per game. They have no facilitator whatsoever, and that's not great. They're shooting 26% from 3-point, and obviously Seton Hall, much more a defense-oriented team. Last year, Seton Hall was outside the top 300 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but not only is this New Haven team not very good with regards to their offense, they're also not amazing with regards to their defense. Now, they're only allowing about 71.5 points per game, but you see what they did against like real teams. Against Penn State, 87 points given up there. They got absolutely housed when they went up against UConn, giving up 79 points with that regard. And hey, they did have a 73-67 game against UMass Lowell, but for Seton Hall, even though I don't think that this is going to be an amazing team from 3 and they're going to be a lower tempo squad, they did add a little bit in the offseason to make you feel good. Elijah Fisher is a 6'6" combo player that was a former top 100 recruit when he was over at Pacific. Did it all with about 4.5 boards, 15.5 points, threw in there about a steal per contest. Again, not a great 3-point shooter, but Adam Miller, 19 point per game guy over at Merrimack, who's able to give you like multiple steals per game. TJ Simpkins was a double figure scorer over at Elon, and AJ Sam McRae, he is a guy that's able able to shoot it well from three. And then the size that you got for this New Haven team, not great to say the least. So likes of Najee Hines along with Stephon Payne. Payne comes on over from Jacksonville. These two guys should be able to dominate down low. I think that Seton just lays it on New Haven, and I do think that for New Haven, they struggle with their offense, but I think that Seton finds theirs. I set my total 137.5. I like the over, and with Seton made them 29.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. 36-5-31, 36-5-32. Chicago State is on the road against Minnesota. Minnesota's a 25 to 25.5 point favorite, and your total is 149.5. So Minnesota's a 30.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 30 with them. Now, for Minnesota, they had that close call against UW Green Bay where they needed a half quarter to be able to pull that one out. So that was not great to say the least. And Jalen Crocker-Johnson was dealing with a little bit of an ailment for that game. That's something that you do want to know. Was still able to get out there on the floor, though, and he's been averaging 11 points, 13.5 boards per game, so he should be able to dominate there. Cade Tyson, 2 years ago when he was over at Belmont, was a really good go-to scorer with about 16.5 points on 46.5% three-point shooting. North Carolina just had so much depth that he wasn't able to get out there on the floor last season, but he's been able to do a great job there. And with Minnesota, they're now coached by Nico Medved, whose Colorado State teams were always outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game, but that said, the last 2 seasons were in the top 55 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And for Chicago State, right now, the defense is a work in progress. They're giving up over 90 points per contest. You had Landon Busey take over the program after he was at Alcorn St 8 seasons ago, and it's very clear this team just does not have any size whatsoever. Stephen Byard is like the only guy in the rotation that's above 6'6", and that's going to be a big issue against Crocker-Johnson and company. Right now, you don't have a single guy for the Chicago State team averaging more than 4.8 rebounds per game, as Marcus Sankersley has been that do-it-all guy, 17 points, 5 boards. He's been able to give you a little bit from the outside as well, but it's Braylon Bush. He last year was a relatively rock-solid three-point shooter when he was over at Prairie View last season, 13.5 points, shot 41% from three. He's now shooting 23% from three-pointers. I do think that it goes northward for the Chicago State team, but I think that they continue to just get absolutely decimated on the glass. Right now, they are a bottom 5 team in terms of opponent's two-point shooting percentage, and I think that Minnesota wins this game on the inside. I set this line at a 156.5 with regards to the total, like the over, and willing to lay up to 30 here with Minnesota. 36-5-33, 36-5-34. SMU is playing against Arkansas Pine Bluff, and Pine Bluff, a very sizable underdog here of 36.5 to 37.5 points. 169.5 is the total, and I set my total 172.5. I like the over. Now, Pine Bluff is playing significantly slower than they did a season ago. Last season, they were a top 30 team in terms of total possessions per game, and this year they're well outside the top 200 with regards to total possessions per game. That despite the fact that they play against the likes of Oklahoma, they play against Vanderbilt, and they've been covering a lot of these games. Like Pine Bluff is right now 0-5, but they've been a little bit more competitive than a lot of people thought because they brought in 2 talented guys. Keon Williams, the top scorer from Abilene Christian last year, 13 points, 5 boards, 3 assists per contest, multiple steals per game, and then Jaquan Scott had a really nice small sample size over at UTSA last season. Last season, he was giving that team 7.5 points, 4.5 boards, got injured after 6 games where he was shooting 44% from three-point range. These guys have come in and they've immediately breathed life. Now, outside of those 2 guys, it's very suspect as what you're getting. Alex Mirhosini, he comes over after he was at the non-D1 ranks last season. He's been able to give you about 9.5 points per contest. Think that you might get a little bit more out of Kyle Brown, who's been in the system for a few seasons as well, but I said, I do think that this line is just way too demonstrative. I set mine at a 30.5 for SMU. They do have Kevin Miller, who's been able to do a nice job in terms of facilitating good, clean offense. He's able to give you 16 plus points per contest. He's always been a guy that's been able to give you over 4 assists per game. And you just take a look at the way that Wake Forest offense has fallen on tough times ever since he left. That's how big of an impact he makes. BJ Edwards has some versatility. Has never been too much of a go-to scorer, but you bring in Corey Washington, who was really solid over at Wichita St 8 seasons ago, guy that was able to give that team 13.5 points, 7.5 boards, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range, and SMU has a guy in Samat Yidoglu who's going to be able to win the battle down low as a 7'2" big man, but that said, for this SMU team, they're also very suspect with their defense. They're allowing opponents to shoot over 36% from three-point range. They're allowing over 12.5 offensive rebounds per game, so I do think that with SMU, they're going to have a high-flying game, but I think that Pine Bluff is going to be able to score just enough to be a hold within this number. Give me the points here with Pine Bluff, set them as 30.5-point dogs, and SMU right now, top 55 team in terms of total possessions per game, a very high-powered offense, a not-so-great defense, so my total 172.5, I like the over, 36-5-35, 36-5-36. Winthrop is on the road against Arkansas. Arkansas is a nice double-figure favorite here. You're going to be laying with them between 19.5 to 20 points. Totals between 165.5 to 167.5. did set my line at 27.5. I'm going to be willing to lay it with Arkansas. Winthrop coming off of a really nice triumph over the weekend against Mercer. They blew them out by over 20 points, but with Winthrop, I still do have quite a few question marks with them. You have Dallin Berry, who comes over from Charleston Southern. He's been able to give you about 17 points per game, and then Logan Duncombe, who has been in the program for a few seasons, began his career over at Indiana as a top 100 recruit, and he's been able to give the team 5.5 rebounds per game. That's been able to restore a little bit of roar down low, but you lose the likes of Kelton Telford and company from a season ago. Team is shooting much better at the free throw line than last season. Last season, they were below 70% at the charity stripe, which was an issue considering they were a top 10 team in terms of percentage of their possessions that ended in a free throw, and they've taken care of the ball. They're only turning the ball over 9 times per game. That said, this is also a unit that is well outside the top 275 in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage. I don't know if they're going to be able to match up with the versatility that Trevon Brazile brings to the table. He's a 6'9" combo player that's giving you 14.5 points, throwing in there 7 boards per contest. He's capable of shooting it from 3, and it was very clear last year he was playing through a lot of injury. And then the freshmen, Darius Acuff, Malik Thomas, they're combining for over 37 points per game for an Arkansas team that they're shooting in the mid-30s from 3. A little bit of that is warped by the fact that they had to play the game early on during the season against Michigan State, who, that is going to be one of the better defenses in all of college basketball, in my opinion. Arkansas, as a result, they're about 114th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. You got a Winthrop team that's looking to run and gun. They're a top 65 team in terms of total possessions per game, but I do think that Winthrop is going to be had by an Arkansas team that, really, aside from that Michigan game, they have been just incredible with regards to their offense. They scored 79 on Stanford, 93 on Central Arkansas, 109 against Southern. So I do think that things get very much cranked up tempo here. You've got DJ Wagner in your number 3 of the Calipari system, now giving out 4 assists per contest. You've got all sorts of unselfish guards, the size down low with Malik Ewan and company. I think it's just done here for Arkansas, so I did set them as a 27.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number, and like the over, set my total 169.5, 36.537, 36.538. Ole Miss is going to be playing us Austin Peay. The Governors of Austin Peay are a 21.5 point underdog. Those between 147.5 to 148.5, and with Ole Miss, I did make them a 24.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to lay the 21.5. I think that Austin Peay is actually going to be a really nice offensive team this season. Corey Gibson, he does a nice job of just getting games slowed down at his tempo. Outside the top 300 was Austin Peay last year in terms of total possessions per game, and they do bring back a pair of nice guys from season ago. Tate McCubbin at 6'8" gave that team double figures, shot in the mid-30s from 3, and Anton Brookshire, he's been just a guy that's dealt with injury throughout his career, but last year over at Austin Peay finally found his footing, 8.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range with about 2.5 assists per game, but for Austin Peay, they've been playing some quite outgunned competition to begin the season. Right now, they're generating about 21.5 turnovers per game. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be a mainstay. They're going to be great on defense, but I don't think it's quite to that regard. And their opponents are shooting 57.8% at the free throw line. That's certainly been able to help them out as well. But they're a team that they don't necessarily have the world's greatest size down low. And I do think that for Ole Miss, just that overall versatility and that Chris Beard style is going to take a lot out of them, as this is an Ole Miss team that, as well, has been able to do a nice job in terms of just taking care of the ball. They've been a top 10 team thus far this season in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis, so that's going to be a little bit strength on strength after Ole Miss last year. They only had 9 turnovers per game. They bring back Malik Dia from the season ago. He's been able to take a nice stride forward to help this team out down low. 5 boards, 13.5 points. Good 3-point shooter at 6'9", and AJ Storr, after last year that Kansas fit was just not for him. He's been able to come in here. He's been able to give you 15 points per game, but it's been the international man of mystery, Ilyas Karmadi. Hopefully I said that correctly. He's been able to come in. He's been able to give the team 16 points per contest. Kazakivha, who was over at the Big South level last season, he's been a perfect fit for this team as well. It is an Ole Miss team that's not allowing a lot of second and third chances on the glass. They're shooting 40% from 3 themselves, and I do think that Austin Peay is going to have success slowing this game down. As a result, I might total 146.5. I do like the under, but for Ole Miss, I do think that they do a nice job taking care of the ball, and that takes away the bread and butter of Austin Peay. I'm going to be willing to lay it with Ole Miss, and I'm going to be in on this total under 36.539, 36.540. Cornell is playing against Army. Army is an underdog of 15.5 points. Totals between 164 to 164.5. Made my total a 165. I'm going to be on the over for Army. It's just a completely new look team from the season ago. You lose your top 4 scorers, and they really really didn't have a lot of depth a season ago. Now, they do have a freshman or two that's been able to step up, the main one being Jackson Furman, who's been able to give you 14.5 points per game, and then you've got a few guys that have been around the system for a few years, like Jordan Everson, who's been able to give you about 9.5 points per game, but this team really doesn't have a lot of size, and for Cornell, typically this is not a team that's going to do a great job on the glass, but that said, they do bring in a guy that I like in Casper Sepp, who was over at Valparaiso. He actually had more rebounds and points a season ago, so that should allow them to really take it to an Army team that is right now outside the top 250 in terms of rebound percentage. Army is looking to take a lot of threes, by the way. Army is attempting 27 two-point shots per game and 37 threes per game. In terms of percentage of shots that come from three, they're towards the top of all of college basketball, but that's not a good thing when you're shooting less than 27% from three-point range, so that's been a little bit less than savory. And Cornell is always a team that loves to bomb it from three. They're attempting over 36 threes per game themselves, while attempting 26 two-point shots, but they're shooting 36% from three-point range, and with his Cornell team, they did lose quite a bit in the backcourt from a season ago, but Cooper Norad, one of the top guys from a year ago, he's back. He's right now averaging 26 points per game. Typically, Cornell is one of those holes greater than some of its parts seems. Well, he has right now been the main headliner for the team, and then you've had Adam Sang Hinton, who's been in the program for a few years, never has really given the team too much. He's really been able to ascend. He's a career 41% three-point shooter. He's supplying 18.5 points per game for Army. They're not going to have much of a response for Sepp, who's been able to give you 5+ rebounds per game with this Cornell team. Even though you do take so many threes, that sets up really good looks from two. They're shooting over 61% on the few two-point shots that they do take as well, and I do think that Cornell going to get things cranked up tempo. I think that Army is going to have a tough time taking care of the ball in general just because they got a new-look team, and I think that Cornell is really just able to take it to an Army team that's looking to play their style, but just doesn't have the pieces to do so. I'm willing to lay it with Cornell, set them as a 19-point favorite, and like the 164 or less over, 36-541, 36-542. DePaul is going to be playing us Gardner Webb, and Gardner Webb is a pretty good-sized underdog here of 21.5 points. The last game, it is 153.5. So my line is 17. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Gardner Webb. Now, a much better effort over the weekend from DePaul against Northwestern rather than when they got blown out on their home floor against Buffalo. I think that was just a bad shooting performance in general, but you do have to have some concerns with this DePaul team because I do think that they're going to be solid down low. NJ Benson was their top rebounder from a season ago. He's been able to give you about 8.5 rebounds per game, but they had to replace their main facilitator in Connor Enright, Brandon Macklin, who was over a season ago over at Radford, and he was solid over at Radford last year. 10 points, a little bit over 2 assists per game. He's been one of the main guys to dish it out with. A lot of guys that like to play off the ball, like a CJ Gunn. They've had to put Landon Blocker a little bit more at the point guard spot. That's not necessarily his forte. You're bringing Caleb Banks, who last year over at Tulane as a 6'7" do-it-all sort of player was averaging 16 points, shooting in the mid-30s from three-point range, and Gardner Webb has had some pretty deplorable defense. Last year they were 300th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Not a lot better this year as they're giving up over 92 points per contest, but that said, they do have a guy in Jacob Hudson who I really like. He's been able to come in there and give you about 15 points per contest. After last season he was more of a just little bit of an off-the-bench role player for this unit. Mix and match in the front court as they did lose a lot of their guards from the last few seasons. Jacob Hogarth, who comes over from Iona, where he was unable to get out there on the floor at 6'9". He's had to be one of their main guys in terms of being able to give you some rebounds, as Hudson and Hogarth are right now the lone two guys on the roster giving you more than 2.3 rebounds per game. It's actually incredible, but that said, with this Gardner Webb team, I do think that they hold in there against a DePaul team that has been all over the place with regards to their offense. They don't necessarily have that main facilitation. It is a Gardner Webb team that they just struggle in general with regards to their scoring, but they have been looking to play much faster with Gardner Webb ever since they had the coaching change a few seasons ago. This is a team that has really been ascending with regards to their tempo. Now DePaul is playing a little bit more slowly this year with regards to DePaul in terms of total possessions per game. Right now they're checking in right around about 187th in all of college basketball. Meanwhile, you've got a Gardner Webb team that's hovering right around about 135th, but that said, Gardner Webb, they've had a lot of struggles. I think that they do just enough to hold in here, and I do think that the Gardner Webb offense gets going a bit more. I did set my total here at a 153, at a 153.5. I think we've gone just a scotch too far. Want to take the points with Gardner Webb and the under 306-543, 306-544. LSU is going to be playing us Alcorn St. Alcorn St, an underdog of 28.5 to 29.5 points. 157.5 is the total, and So at 12-164, I'm going to be in on the over. You've got an Alcorn St team that gave up over 100 points night number 1 to Florida State. Ever since then, the defense has been a little bit better, but they are still well outside the top 250 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And with Alcorn St, they're going through a lot of, shall we say, coaching change in general. Jake Morton, who was an assistant over at Florida State 8 seasons ago, he takes over this team, and he's been looking to have them just crank up a little bit of tempo in general. If you look at Alcorn St in terms of total possessions per game, right now they're about 176th in the country, but that's about 5 possessions per game more than they were a season ago, and they did retain a few pieces from that team from a year ago. As you've got Omari Hamilton, who last season he did a nice job giving that team about 7.5 points per contest. He's been really lost in the just dust a little bit. He's only given the team about 3 points per game, and just has not been able to see a lot of minutes in general. It's Shane Lancaster, who began his career over at Niagara, went down to the non-D1 ranks for a bit of time. He's been that main guy with about 13 points per game. You just don't have a lot down low with this Alcorn State team. You don't have a single guy that's giving you more than 4.4 rebounds per game. Nick Woodyard, the transfer from Stony Brook, has been that guy at 6'6", and last year over at Stony Brook, he did give that team about 5 points per contest, so he's able to give you a little bit of ability there. But with LSU, you've got a team that should be able to absolutely bludgeon down the glass, and for LSU, I love the fact that they brought in Didon Thomas. Thomas last season was 15.5 points, 4.5 assists, 4 boards per contest over at UNLV, a former top 100 recruit that actually decided to go to UNLV, and he's done a nice job going out over 7 assists per game. Michael Nwoko at 6'10", he should be able to absolutely own the glass. He's been able to give the team 17 plus points per contest. Jalen Reed has really good versatility as well. He last season was limited to 8 games due to injury, but career 39% 3-point shooter. That's right now giving you 12 points per contest. I do think that LSU is going to be very comfortable playing up and down the Matt McMahon style. I've seen this team in the top 100 in terms of total possessions per game, so this at a high total here of a 164. I'm going to be in on the over. And with Alcorn State, did set them as an underdog of 28 points. So you're at the 29 plus, taking the points, and I'm going to be in on the over. 306-545, 306-546. Pepperdine is playing us in New Orleans. New Orleans actually opened up as a favorite. Now they're down to being a 3.5 point underdog. The odds game is 154.5, and with New Orleans, I did set them as an underdog of 7 points, so I actually very much agree with the line move. I'm going to be willing to lay with Pepperdine. I recognize that Pepperdine lost a ton from a season ago, and this has been a New Orleans team that's really impressed. You bring in Jakevion Buckley. He was the main facilitator over at Southeast Louisiana. It was a New Orleans team that had no facilitation whatsoever a season ago, and they suspended pretty much 3 of their top 4 scorers towards the back half of the season. He's been able to give them 7 assists per game. Colton Benson, a really nice knockdown shooter the last 2 years over at Texas A&M, was shooting over 90% the free throw line, 40% from 3 there. He's come in, he's been able to give the team 21 points per game, and then the main holdover is MJ Thomas, who, as a freshman last year, double-figure score with 6 rebounds per game. He and Churchill Abis, who he was over at Wake Forest and DePaul, these two guys have been able to combine for about 13 rebounds per game, but now you've got a New Orleans team that has to travel from pretty much the southern part of the country on out to the great state of California, and for Pepperdine, even though they've got a lot of moving pieces with this team, they found a way to be able to find 4 double-figure scorers. Javon Cooley, who was a really good scorer over at Marist a few seasons ago, he's been able to give you 13 points per contest. Styles Phipps, he began his career over at Grand Canyon, where he just couldn't find a role. He's been able to supply 12 points per game. And Aaron Clark, he began his career at Wake Forest, decided to go down to the non-D1 ranks. He has been able to resurface at 6'6", all sorts of versatility, 16 points, right around about 5 rebounds per game. And Danilo Dosic, I know that at 6'10", he's actually a little bit more of a just light it up from 3-point range guy rather than give you boards, but he gives his team some size. And then Yatanan Levy, he was a player that actually played professionally, if I'm not mistaken, in Israel, might have been over at Turkey, but somewhere out there in the Mid-East. He actually came over to UW Green Bay mid-season, and he's been able to give the team a little bit of spark with about 5 boards per contest, a career about 30% 3-point shooter at 6'9" as well with this New Orleans team, even though they have done a really nice job of turning over a new leaf. That big upset win that they had over TCU, that was TCU being like 15% from 3 and them absolutely hitting everything from 3. And right now, opponents are shooting just 19.8% from 3 against New Orleans. It's an improved perimeter defense. That's not going to continue, though. And they're in the bottom 5 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis that allow good, clean possessions for Pepperdine, who I think gets the job done here. So my total 157. I like the over, and I'm willing to lay it with Pepperdine. 306-547, 306-548. You've got Fresno State playing against Stephen F. Austin. Stone cold Stephen F. Austin, a 1.5 to a 2.5 point favorite, totals between 145.5 to a 146.5. set the Lumberjacks as a favorite of 2.5 points. So one to lay up to a deuce with them. For Stephen F. Austin, they're always a team that's in the top 20 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and they've done a nice job in terms of adding some rebounding. They're actually forcing much fewer turnovers this season. You've got a little bit of a new style with Matt Bruner coming in, but that's Keon Thompson, who was with the program last year. He was injured for like the first 10 or so games of the season before he really became that main scorer. He and Matt Heyman were giving you about 14 points per game. He's really ascended, 22 points per contest. Last year, Stephen F. Austin could not hit water if they fouled with both from 3 or at the free throw line. Still shooting 60% at the free throw line, but shooting over 42% from 3. Do think that you're going to see some regression there, but love the fact that they brought in Cam Burton, who was over at Southeast Louisiana last year, give that team about 7 points. He's a career 38.5% three-point shooter, and Jared Colonel, who is averaging about 2 blocks per contest over at Northwestern St. He does a great job as well. And you've got a Fresno State team that's looking to run. Under Vance Wahlberg, they've been a top 50 team in terms of total possessions per game the last 2 seasons, but outside the top 3 under Wahlberg in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They're turning the ball over about 15 times per game. To their credit, they've generated about 17 turnovers per game as well. Jake Heidbreder, who was a nice go-to scorer over at Air Force a few seasons ago, had some moments over at Clemson last season. He's been able to come in, give the team 18 points per contest, and Zayon Collins is really the lone holdover from last year's just disaster of team that resulted in a gambling scandal. He's been able to supply about 15 points per game after last season. He was a 12.5 point, 4.5 assists per game guy, so that gives a little bit more facilitation, but they lost on their home floor against USC Upstate. It's been a team that's had a tough time being able to just stick with being able to just have good, clean offense, and right now they've been very fortunate with opponents only shooting 27.5% from 3. That should be going northward now. Stephen F. Austin should see some regression with their 3-point shooting as well, and I think that this is a sloppier game, semi-total at a 152.5. I think that those turnovers turn into fast break layups, and I think that you just get a lot of possessions in general in this game. So, and on the over, I'm willing to lay up to deuce here with Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin. 36.549, 36.550. Washington plays us to Southern. Southern's a 20 to a 22.5 point dog, 154.5 to 155.5 is the total, and set Washington as a 21.5 point favorite. Personally, I would rather take 22.5 rather than lay 20.5 with Washington, because this is a Southern team that they always have a lot of nice, just ancillary pieces that all do a good job of coming together. It's the old whole is greater than the sum of its parts sort of approach, and you saw that last year with Southern, a Southern team that was averaging well over 75 points per game, but they didn't have anyone scoring like more than 12 points per contest, and you've got a lot of those guys from a season ago back. I know that they've taken on the chin a little bit, giving up over 100 points to Arkansas, and this is a Southern team that they will gamble for turnovers. Last year in the top 35 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and they've been still getting those turnovers this year, about 20 turnovers per game. A lot of that came against their non-D1 foes, and they're right now shooting 41% for 3. We should see a bit of regression there, but they have been able to find a little bit more of that go-to scorer this season with Michael Jacobs being able to step up. He's right now giving you about 21.5 points per contest, shooting 45.5% for 3, which I don't think that that's going to be a mainstay, but for the Southern team, they were also a really good team on the offensive glass, and bringing in Malik Abajawald, who he was over at UMass a season ago. He was a solid rebounder for UMass last season. 4.5 points, 5 boards per contest. Not a guy that's going to have versatility, but he stepped in. He's been able to give this team a nice post presence with about 8.5 rebounds per game. You've had Rondé Hall as a little bit of a transfer that goes on to Southern after he was at the non-D1 ranks, be able to provide about 2.5 assists per game, and this is very clearly a team that is going to be looking to find their footing a little bit more. They've dealt with a little bit of injury, but of the 10 players that have played at least 3 games for this team, you've got right now like 10 different guys that are seeing at least 12 minutes per game, and you've got 12 different guys that are seeing at least 8 minutes per contest, and that's going to give a lot of different looks to a Washington team that they have, in my opinion, one of the most underrated players in all of college basketball, Hans Steinbeck, who's right now giving you 14.5 points, 12.5 boards, 2.5 assists at 6'11". He does it all for this team, and he's also actually made like all but one of his threes thus far this season. Zoom Diallo, he's a guy that is in year number 2 of being able to control the offense, and the offense has been much more efficient. I think that they're realizing that not giving all their money to one guy in Great Osabar like they did last season was a good thing. Wesley Yates has come back after he actually began his career at Washington, give this team 15 points per game, but his team has also been having a little bit of a deficiency in terms of down low. They're outside the top 125 in terms of opponent's 2-point shooting percentage. They're giving up a lot of offensive rebounds as well, and I do think that Southern does just enough to be able to hold in there, especially with Washington still dealing with a little bit of an injury to Desmond Claude, who has yet to hit to the floor, and Brandon Roy Jr. has yet to see action either. So circumstance where I set my line at 21.5, I'd rather take 22 here with Southern or more rather than lay the number, and I set my total 153.5, so in on the under 3 of 6.551, 3 of 6-5-52. San Francisco plays host to Northwestern St. Northwestern St is a underdog of 19.5 points. 146.5 is the total. And with Northwestern St, I did set them as an underdog of 16 points. So I'm going to be able to take those points. With Northwestern St, they were a pretty rock solid defense a season ago in terms of being able to generate turnovers. They do have a little bit of a propensity to have it not go their way down low. And San Francisco, you've got Sasa Gil-Obrea, who's a true 7-footer that should be able to take it out of the seam a little bit. Losing Jared Colonel in the offseason was rough, but they have found a little bit of size in 6'10" Mustafa Lom, who comes on over from Senegal. He should be able to get the team a little bit more moving forward, but it's really been a small ball lineup for the team with Cordrick Turner at 6'6", really other than Lom being the lone guy that's above 6'5" that's seeing good minutes, but you've got Izzy Miles, who was able to generate a lot of turnovers over at Tarleton. Chris Mambirio, he's a guy that's in year number 2 of the system, actually year number 3 of the system, and he's been able to give the team 8.5 points. Not necessarily a great three-point shooter, but does a good job of being able to play good, hard-nosed defense, and you bring back Micah Thomas from a season ago, who's really been able to ascend on offense, 19.5 points per game. Right now shooting 58% from 3. That's not a mainstay, but he's a career about 38% three-point shooter, and I do think that for San Francisco, they're going to be able to win that battle down low, but they're in a little bit of transition in terms of backcourt with Malik Thomas no longer being there, and that's shown by the fact that they're turning the ball over 16 times per game. Now, Ryan Beasley had a nice three-point shooting shot stretch in like the last 10 games of the season where he was averaging double figures, shooting 40% from 3. He's been able to give the team 14 points per game, but there's really nobody to really get him the ball, and he's had to play on the ball quite a bit, as Vukasin Masic has been your main facilitator with about 4 assists per game after he was at Portland 8 seasons ago, but has never really been like a true facilitator. Last year over at Portland, 10.5 points, 3.5 assists per game for a team that didn't play a lot of defense and just really didn't have a lot of flow in general. So, that's a little bit of concern. Love Mookie Cook, former top 75 recruit, who's been able to give the team 12.5 points per game, and David Fuchs, who was able to give Rhode Island 5+ rebounds per game, should be able to win that battle down low. But I think that Northwestern, they're going to do a nice job in terms of generating some turnovers to help them remain lively in this one. I did set my total at a 150. I do think that Northwestern is going to be at a little bit more down low, but I also think that San Francisco is a bunch that is going to be giving up a little bit around the perimeter as well. It is the San Francisco team that has been looking to play with a little bit more pace, averaging over 80 points per game. So, like the over and the points here with Northwestern St, 36-5-53, 36-5-54. California is going to be playing us Presbyterian. Presbyterian's an underdog of 19 to 19.5 points. 146 to 146.5 is the total. Set a total of a 145.5. I do like the under with Presbyterian. Right now, they're outside the top 340 in terms of total possessions per game, and I'd set a line of a 19.5. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 19 here with Cal. Now, Presbyterian has been able to do a really good job down low. They did have their main big man a season ago in Jonah Pierce get injured less than 10 games into the season, and then Jalen Peterson took over for him. Now they just form a nice 1-2 punch down low. They're combining for a little bit over 20 rebounds per game. Pierce has been much better in terms of scoring, 15 points per game. Peterson only about 7 points per contest, but outside of Carl Parrish, who's right now giving you about 14 points per contest, you don't have a single guard for Presbyterian giving you more than 6.5 points per game. With Parrish last season was a bit of a part-time starter that did shoot about 39% from 3, 7 points per game, so he's a nice, capable scorer, but it is a Presbyterian team that as well, shooting 26% from 3 after they were a top 100 team with this regard last year. I do think that it's going to be able to ascend a little bit, but I'm losing someone like Corey Mincy in the backcourt has led to the team being outside the top 275 in terms of their ball security, and for California, they should do a nice job with Day-Day Ames coming on over from Virginia, giving the team 22.5 points per contest, and it's a Cal team that's been generating about 14 turnovers per game. That's solid, maybe not amazing, but solid of being able to take it to them, and with this Cal team, they should be able to match the size that you got down low of Presbyterian with having Lee Dort back, who's been able to give you 10 points, 7 boards per contest, has always been a little bit more of a defense-oriented guy. Milos Ilic is able to give you a few rebounds coming in from Loyola of Maryland, and you've got a guy in like a Chris Bell who's got great versatility. 2 seasons ago when he was over at Syracuse, fell out of favor last year, but 2 years ago, 12 points, he was able to shoot 42% from 3-point range, and I think that that's going to be a matchup nightmare for Presbyterian. Again, I think that Presbyterian sees a little bit of a rise with their 3-point shooting, but I think that they slow things down. But with this Cal team, when they were really at peak force under Mark Manson when he was over at Utah Valley, his Utah Valley teams were always top 40 teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and sans that Kansas State game, they've been pretty good on defense here. So I set a total of a 145.5, like the under, and I'm willing to lay up to 19 with Cal, and we wrap things up 3-6-5-55, 3-6-5-56. San Diego is playing us a Grambling. Grambling is a underdog of 5 to 5.5 points. So on this game, it is gone down from 157 down to 151.5 to a 152.5. I personally took a shot on that 157 under. I would need at least a 153 to be able to take a shot here. So if you still have a 153, I'd be willing to do so. As 152 actually becomes my buy point on the over. This has went way down, and I think that people are taking note that this is a Grambling team that is in quite a bit of transition right now, and right now they are outside the top 320 in terms of ball security. Patrick Carreri, he comes on over from Florida A&M, and I do bring over with him Roderick Coffey, who was able to give you about 3-4 assists per game over there last season. This team is, despite being a relatively low-tempo team, turning the ball over 17 times per game, and they're outside the top 300 with regards to offensive rebound percentage. As a matter of fact, they're getting just dump trucked on the glass, outside the top 230 in terms of their rebound percentage. You've had Jamel Lane come in. He's been able to give you about 12.5 points, 4 boards after he began his career over at Northwestern St, where he was a nice part-time starter for that team. But that said, I do think that San Diego is going to be able to take it to them. I made them the 8.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to lay that, as they brought in a lot in the transfer portal. Tim Moore was a rock-solid rebounder over at NJIT. Hasn't given you a ton of rebounding thus far, but he's been able to give you 9 points per game. San Diego, I don't think is going to be able to maintain 47.2% three-point shooting, but you do have a guy in Juan Sebastian Gorosito, who he, over at Ball State last year, shot about 40% from three, career 39% three-point shooter. He's been the main guy with about 15 points per game, and then Tunari Lane was a good double-figure scorer last season over at Georgia State, where he gave that team 14 points, career about 36% three-point shooter. He's not necessarily the world's greatest player on the defensive side of things, but has been rock solid on offense. And for the San Diego team, they've been a little bit sloppy with the ball, with about 13 turnovers per game themselves. So I do think that helps out with a little bit of the total. Like I said, once you get to a 153 or higher, it's the under. 152 or less, the over. But that's it for San Diego. They've also done a nice job guarding the three-point line. And for this Grambling team, with them having a little bit of tough time on the glass, it masks a real deficiency that San Diego has been outside the top 200 with regards to rebound percentage as well. Going from the southern part of the country down to the west, I do think that's going to be tough for Grambling as well. One to lay with San Diego, and 152 or less, looking at the over. 153 or higher, the under end. That'll wrap things up for the Tuesday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSIN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Ben Stevens. He does great work here at VSIN. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from his fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, Lars EM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, giving you picks and analysis on every game every day. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
'Tis the season of gifting and halls to deck, and the who's and who Newville were in love with new tech. Where can we find Sonos and Samsung and Nintendo, they shouted. Would they find it in one place? This they questioned and doubted. When suddenly a who yelled, Walmart's the place to start! And each who added headphones, TVs, and games to their carts. With Walmart, their shopping was done in a flurry. They cried out, who knew? And ordered their gifts in a hurry. Shop the latest tech gifts in the Walmart app.
Clorox Toilet Wand, it's all in one. Clorox Toilet Wand, it's all in one.
Hey, what does all in one mean?
The caddy, the wand, the preloaded pad. There's a cleaner in there, inside the pad.
So Clorox Toilet Wand is all I need to clean a toilet?
You don't need a bottle of solution to get into this toilet revolution. Clorox, clean feels good.
Use as directed.